The year is the 2020s in Seoul, South Korea. Today was just supposed to be another day, with every person lost in their own world, mindlessly going from point A to point B. An ordinary day that was no different from any other day before. People were naive and held the notion that the peace they thought they had would last forever. But even the remote idea of peace would be put to the test one fateful day. The day normalcy was shattered came with the appearance of what people now call dungeons. The most apparent and terrifying rift in space appeared in the middle of a crowded city, right where the population and foot traffic were at their peak. At that point in time, no human had any idea of what they were seeing, what was about to happen, or how different their lives would be from that moment on. It just came out of nowhere, a historically altering event that changed the course of humanity's trajectory. What came out of the dimensional rifts were monsters beyond human comprehension, muscular bodies, demonic horns, and eyes exploding with aggression. A countless number of monsters poured out of that dungeon. They did not waste a single second and immediately went after the people on the streets. For some ungodly reason, that was the day forces from out of this world cornered humanity in fear. In a state of frenzy and panic, the situation quickly devolved into one where every man or woman was thinking only for themselves. Without the help of fellow humans, anyone would just be a sitting duck against this new fearsome force that tore the fabric of space, right in the middle of a random street, on a random day. An orc-like muscular monster raised its battle axe with vitriol, aiming for a poor woman who had just tripped and fallen. But it's not like everything was bleak and hopeless at this bizarre point in time. With the despair of the unknown horrors also came hope. From within the chaos, the merciless monster was swallowed by a bright light, as a clean swing from a magical sword took the beast down. A heroic figure stood tall. They are humanity's hope in this world, where every second of life is under threat from unknown forces. These entities are called hunters. They provide aid through the subjugation of any foreign enemies that dare to encroach on humanity's space. Boasting different abilities and masteries, they are the world's first and final line of defense. To these hunters, killing monsters is not just altruism or charity. There are resources that appear when a creature from a dimensional rift is killed. So instead of threatening humanity's very existence, the emergence of other worlds has ironically helped humanity prosper. Equipped with power that defies common sense and the physical limitations of the old world, the world of the hunters began. As for our story's protagonist, well, he's not exactly in a good spot today. He has to run an errand to the Hunter Association registration office, where just like any other bureaucratic office, you have to get a number and wait until it's called. The woman at the other side of the desk was looking at the details in his paperwork, and she could not believe that someone like this man could exist. He possesses the rare labor class. His name is Yugji, and you'd better remember that. The office worker continued to inquire about any skills or traits that the man might have gotten through awakening. He just smiled as if the question had been asked about him 1,000 times before. Yugji gave a wry smile and an awkward little laugh as he admitted that he did not possess any skills or traits at all. At the heart of the city, a sprawling metropolis of massive conglomerates and organizations within a quaint corner of this urban jungle, was a small business with a potion bottle for a logo. It was the Seoul Sector 7 Hunter store. A young lady and what looked to be her father entered the store to see and possibly buy some of the wares. Yugji owns and manages this small hunter store business by himself. The dad was just looking to get some potions, but the young lady smiled and pointed right at the owner. She walked up to Yugji and asked, rather casually, if he really was that man who had the rare labor class. He'd been asked this question many times, but it never got any easier or less awkward to answer. The labor class is rare, but not for good reasons. The young lady asked if it was really true that Yugji doesn't have any skills, essentially making it impossible for him to hunt. Her father quickly gathered the potions they needed and apologized for the young lady's straightforward words. Without missing a beat, Yugji assured the man that it was okay. He had gotten quite used to this type of thing by now. Besides, the young lady hadn't said anything wrong. As he scanned the potions on the counter, Yugji admitted that he truly did lack any special skills. Unlike most people, he didn't even hunt, he just gathered resources from time to time. The young lady was still fascinated by the fact that such a man existed in this world. Her father lectured her to stop asking such awkward questions and wasting time, but she insisted there was nothing wrong with being curious, especially in such a bizarre case. Just out front on the service road, the full swing of the city's armed forces and law enforcement squads were being deployed to an area in need of urgent assistance. Watching this sight from the storefront window, the young lady guessed it must be a rank 3 dungeon that had just opened nearby, especially if the defense forces were bringing in the panzers. There were also ambulances among them. It was best to avoid wherever these units were going. That already went without saying, as neither she nor her father had anywhere near enough skill to entertain the thought of going to such a high-level zone. Yugji watched as the customers bickered, their argument continuing even while watching the endless flow of forces heading toward the rank 3 dungeon. A few moments later, he respectfully sent them off. The two were still bickering non-stop. Yugji knew that there would be a lot of resources in a place like a rank 3 dungeon, abundant treasures he would probably never get his hands on. It was impossible for the armed forces to even consider contacting him for such work. It had been 5 years since he was awakened out of nowhere on that special day. He had received a unique class called Laborer, but it was hardly anything to be happy about. Looking at his Grand Hunter profile, it was evident he didn't receive any skills or traits. He couldn't even dream of going inside a dungeon with other hunters to kill monsters. His stats were the very definition of normal. Yugji had already come to terms with that. But instead of feeling sorry for himself, he decided to support hunts from the rear. After a company or guild cleared a dungeon, Yugji would sneak in and pick up whatever leftovers he could find, selling them for a modest profit. No one really recognized the work he put into that gig. Between that and running his hunter store to peddle his wares, he made a decent enough living enough to support his true passion, reading old books. Any old book he could get his hands on he'd read. For Yugji, nothing beat cracking open an ancient account of the past, no matter what it was about. The little store didn't get too busy in the middle of the day, giving him plenty of time to peacefully read. Today had been running long though, so long that he was starting to yawn and feel sleepy. The difficulty of the book he had chosen might also be playing a part. Though an enthusiast, the thick green book was giving him a hard time. His eyes glossed over the pages until he could no longer bear the weight of his eyelids. It was nap time for Mr. Labor class. He finally passed out on top of the book he had been trying to decipher. The open page he stopped at featured a massive illustration of what looked like a magical tree. Collecting and reading old books is quite the chore for some, but there's always a non-zero chance it could lead to something extraordinary. The page Yugji had paused on began to emit an energy full of vitality. That illustrious energy started to converge on the realistic illustration. Yugji was in his study at the hunter store, peacefully taking a midday nap 1 second, and then the next he was transported to a mysterious plane as a piece of leaf hit his forehead. When he finally regained consciousness, panic and countless questions immediately flooded his mind. He was now sitting in the middle of a mysterious jungle. After composing himself at least a little, he started racking his brain to figure out where he was. There didn't seem to be any apparent landmark to observe. The whole forest was covered in thick foliage and an encroaching fog. He tried pinching himself as hard as he could. The pain proved this was definitely not a dream. Another possibility was that he was under an illusion. So he decided to at least check his status window. Everything looked pretty much normal, nothing special, just a unique class and a whole bunch of numbers that screamed mediocrity. Now that he had calmed down for a minute, he noticed another eerie trait of the forest. For a place so large and rich in vegetation, it was dreadfully silent. Yugji couldn't hear any animal sounds. His limited vision due to the thick fog didn't help either. But what he could see now were some twigs with a strange fruit that looked like it had been hit by a storm. With his rich experience in handling ingredients for his shop, Yugji had never seen any fruit quite like it. The system listed it as a level 1 EA herb. It makes the EA consumption of all skills 0 for 10 seconds when consumed. Yugji had never heard of a plant called EA herb before, but he could not believe its description. That effect was just too absurd. No matter how you spin it, 0 EA consumption for 10 seconds was an incredible advantage. To put it into context, in this world awakened hunters need EA, or ether, to use any skill. It's like fuel that powers their abilities. The stronger the skill, the more EA it consumes. That's what made this mysterious herb so amazing. It basically gave you 10 seconds of unrestrained combat. If Yugji could take even just a little liquid from this herb, he'd be able to study its effects. Unfortunately, he didn't bring a bottle with him on this impromptu adventure to an unfamiliar place. While thinking about that wasted opportunity, he noticed something else. Not far from where the herbs were, there were leaves still clinging to a tree that looked like it had been wrecked by something unknown. It was an unnatural sight. Those leaves might die if left as they were. Even in this unfamiliar land, Yugji decided to do the kind thing and help the leaves survive. He carefully transferred the fledgling plant to a new location where it could start establishing stronger roots, and even gave it a kickstart with splashes of water. Luckily, there was water nearby that he could use to increase the chances of keeping the plant alive. Yuji's hands were full of dirt, and even moving the tiny plant had tired him out. But the smile on his face was genuine. Out of nowhere, the system notified him, "You have gained plant immobility level 1. After obtaining the plant-friendly level 1 skill, another notification followed. "You have gained the blessing of XXX. Level 1 trait, blessing of XXX. These notices came out of nowhere and shocked Yugji to the bone. After years of being nothing in the awakening department, he suddenly gained a skill and a trait in one go, all from simply planting a twig back into the ground. Little did he know the tiny twig he helped had already started taking root below the surface at an unprecedented rate. It is safe to say this is not your run-of-the-mill twig. The plant was digging deeper into the earth, absorbing the lush and bright energy contained below. Yugji watched as the old tree from which he had cut the twig began to dematerialize into thin air. Meanwhile, the smaller piece developed into something special in just a matter of seconds. He would have called what was happening in front of him impossible, yet to see is to believe. Yugji was frozen, staring at the incredible and magical sight, until he was suddenly transported back to his office. The trees around him were replaced by the rich collection of old books on his shelves. He was back where he was supposed to be without even having had time to fully process what happened in those mysterious foggy woods. He figured it might have just been a hyper-realistic dream. He was about to wipe the sleep from his eyes, but something didn't feel right. He felt a rough and cold sensation. There was dirt on his hands and clothes. This only further supported the idea that what he experienced was not a dream after all. There was something about the ancient book he had been researching, something truly special. To think that his hands would be covered in dirt while he was just sleeping soundly in his office was an absurd thought. Of course, there was also the possibility that he might be unknowingly suffering from sleepwalking, but he was certain the door was locked, and there was no place with dirt anywhere around where he sat. Going by the logic of his first trip to the mysterious forest, he might just be able to return if he falls asleep again. When you have an idea and want to see if it works, there's only one thing to do: test it. At the first chance he got, Yugji did just that. And by the looks of the converging energy in the middle of the woods, it was a success. As expected, he was transported to the exact same place as before. It might take a little while to get used to, but at least he had now established that the place was real. It was the same place, but with some subtle changes. Right now, it looked a bit wider than before. The fog seemed to be clearing up a little as well. Based on what he had seen and experienced, this might be a special dungeon he could enter in his sleep. He had never heard or read anything about such a place. As he was trying to take in as much information as he could from his surroundings, he noticed something strange about the barren trees surrounding the twig he had tried to revive. Now juicy golden fruit had sprouted from them. It was a level 1 solar apple. Its effect stated that, when combined with a health potion, the healing amount increases by 20%, though its duration decreases to 80%. Unlike the EA herb, Yugji had heard of these so-called solar apples. He knew how rare they were even in high-ranking dungeons. The 20% boost in healing they provided was far too good to ignore. As the owner of a small hunting shop, he also knew that health potions were the most commonly used items in dungeons. However, over-the-counter healing potions available to the public only healed a maximum of 10% of one's total health, and in small quantities, With the solar apple's effect on top of that, not only would the healing be significantly stronger, but the recovery process would also be much faster. And it wasn't just one or two solar apples either. As far as the eye could see, the once barren trees were now teeming with ripe solar apples, waiting to be harvested. Yuji's mind raced. If he could take the solar apples and herbs out of this place, he might be able to create potions with incredible effects. It still felt weird to think about it, but he tried to convince himself that it would be fine to take one or two just to study them. As he thought about how to carry them, suddenly a sack pouch fell from the sky, hitting him square in the face. But this wasn't just any ordinary pouch. It was a valuable dimensional pouch, an item that could store materials in a limited independent space. As he examined it, wondering if he could store items inside, he realized there were already a few bottles stored inside. He had just been thinking of how to carry the items from this place, only for the sky to provide him with a solution. Yuji could only laugh awkwardly at the eerie thought of something listening to him from above. Regardless, he had gotten everything he needed. It was time to test if he could harvest the treasures from this place and bring them back. The very next day, let's shift our focus to the famous hunter specialty chain store in District 7 of Seoul, known as the Hunting Ground. Inside, customers had already lined up early to buy hunting supplies. The store was so popular that buyers were pushing and shoving to get to the front of the line. A hunter wearing heavy armor at the front was furious when he was notified that there were no more paralysis resistance potions left. The store attendants tearfully apologized for the inconvenience, explaining that they were out of stock and that it would take an hour for a refill. For busy, high-profile hunters, this kind of delay was unacceptable. Some had already ordered their assistants to contact other businesses, as the time frame for entering dungeons is limited. But every major hunting supply business was also in the middle of a massive shortage. While everyone was whining and complaining about being late for their hunts, someone entered the room and all eyes turned to that person. Dark hair, beautiful face, top-tier armor, sharp disposition, a fearsome blade. She is Ku Hien, also known as the Sword Witch. She skipped the long line of complaining customers and directly asked the attendant to please call the manager. No one dared to complain that she didn't line up. For some of them, this was their first time seeing a hunter of such caliber as Ku Hien in person. She was dressed in rare class artifacts, no lower than items looted from Tier 4 dungeons. The Sword Witch is ranked 12th in the current hunter rankings, so it's understandable why she's decked out in top-notch gear. The manager finally showed up to personally welcome the Sword Witch, stuttering, having no idea that such a renowned figure in the hunting world would come to the store in person. But she had been forced to come. The store had been dodging her calls about the potions she ordered in advance. The manager apologized, explaining they had a lot of prior bookings and that the potions Ku Hien needed were still unavailable. However, someone of her stature could not afford to waste time waiting for potions. She was under a tight schedule. In 30 minutes, she would be entering a dungeon. The Sword Witch ignored the incompetent manager and pulled out her phone to check for nearby hunter shops. Even general stores would do. In a small Sector 7 hunter store, Yuji had successfully harvested ingredients from the mysterious forest and was now conducting experiments. He used purified water, undi tears and herb liquid, a pretty compact list. With the main potion brewed just the right way, he added the solar apple concentrate and mixed it carefully to complete the experiment. As he waited and observed the result, the system sent him another notification. Due to XXX blessing, a great success verdict has been applied to the concoction. He had also unlocked the first level of the sought-after skill, alchemy. The final product was a level 1 special potion. Upon use, all skill F consumption becomes 0 for the next 14 seconds. Restores 14% of maximum health over the span of 15 seconds. Yuji had expected the effects to be good, but not this good. Even self-proclaimed alchemists didn't have the alchemy skill. Unlocking it in just one experimental run was shocking. As he swirled the solution around, observing how unbelievably pure it was, he couldn't help but wonder what in the world is the blessing of XXX that gave him such results. But before pondering that further, he had to ask himself, should he sell this potion? He knew the potion had outstanding effects, but pricing it would be tricky. On top of that, it could be a hard sell, since the description sounded too good to be true. People might not believe him if he casually listed off the effects, so he steeled his resolve to not sell it yet, and to try it out on himself first. At that exact same moment, the sword witch entered his humble little store. Yugji wore his usual customer service smile and politely asked the elegantly armored woman how he could be of service while his experimental special potion sat on the counter. She moved like lightning, going from the entrance to the counter in a split second, desperately asking for potions because she was running out of time. The sword witch finally noticed the fizzy concoction sitting on the counter, almost as if it was begging to be taken. Kuhian asked if the contents of the bottle were a health potion, and Yugji confirmed that it was. But before he could explain further, the sword witch cut him off. When she asked what its effects were, Yugji tried to insist that the potion was still not for sale, but she had no time to hear him out. She simply apologized, saying she couldn't afford to talk any longer. If it's a health potion and there's nothing wrong with it, I'll just take it. The sword witch threw a pile of cash onto the counter and told Yugji to contact her guild in case the compensation wasn't enough. Then she left as fast as she arrived, disappearing in an instant with the speed of a top-ranked hunter. Yugji was still worried about how this situation would turn out. But the sword witch should be fine, right? Let's see if that's the case. Let's follow the sword witch in her dungeon excursion. It looked like today would be an easy run. She hadn't even drawn her blade. Instead, she cast a spell that summoned energy swords, instantly one-shotting monsters that dared to cross her path. She dispatched powerful creatures like they were minor inconveniences, clearly aiming for something deeper inside. Her other party members were only there as designated looters, gathering materials from fallen monsters she hadn't bothered to carve. As expected from the 12th ranked hunter, the others had it easy, but still felt a little scummy. It was like being carried through the dungeon without a chance to hone their own skills. The older looter had long since given up trying to grow stronger so as not to burden the sword witch. He had accepted his role, quietly gathering resources while she wreaked havoc. He had been with Ku Haiyan for a while now, and he remembered the old her a time when she would let less talented members join the fights. But after one particular incident, she changed, becoming a complete solo play hunter. Newbies didn't know about that incident. It had been a while. As the older looter was about to explain, they suddenly heard the sword witch's panicked voice shout, "Run!" At first they didn't even see the reason behind the urgency became clear, and when they saw it they looked frozen in fear. Standing up front, emanating a domineering aura, was a manstalker, an aversion-level monster the size of an armored car. It was not only physically imposing, it also used extreme poison as a weapon. An aversion-level monster that only appears in grade 4 or higher dungeons shouldn't be in this place at all. Failure to escape would only mean certain death. The sword witch immediately rushed in with her blade spell, once again insisting that the two should run as far and fast as humanly possible. Her speed was no joke. Every step propelled her deeper into the monster's strike zone, but she was charging in with all of her magical blades primed and ready to stab the manstalker all at once. She finally pulled out her ultimate weapon, a massive greatsword shining with blue light. The full-powered slash, however, was easily blocked. The manstalker's nasty, naked hand-like pincers turned out to be tougher than expected. They could actually contend with her greatsword. With the body of a human demon-scorpion hybrid, it excelled in both speed and strength, making Manstalker a fitting name. In hopes of wounding the sword witch, the monster mowed down a decent chunk of the dungeon's forest. Even Sacrian had to admit that this creature might be too damn strong for her. Just dodging those sharp attacks had worn her out considerably. Her ethyl was almost completely consumed. The only thing she could think of now was that she only had enough left to buy time for the others to escape. At times like this she always gets reminded of that incident, the one that changed her. If Suark were here, things would be going a lot differently, but she must push on. She knows that Suark is not around anymore, things have changed, and she must now rely on herself. She took the potion she had hurriedly bought from a tiny general store in the city and popped the cork. Looking at its contents, she was determined to believe in only herself from now on, and while she's at it, she might as well believe in this odd potion too. Since it came from a general store, she already braced herself for the foulest taste imaginable. But to her surprise, the potion didn't taste or feel awful. She emptied the entire flask in one sip without even noticing. It was a potion, all right, but oddly it was as delicious as a fine beverage. Another thing that shocked her was how consuming the concoction made her feel as if she were overflowing with infinite ether. With her combat experience, she immediately knew this boost was massive. So massive that she wouldn't just have to buy time, it was massive enough to turn the tables on the manstalker. She was going for round 2. Rather than retreating, she took the initiative to advance. The monster took her on, as if confident it had already won. But this time, things were different. The sword witch executed her ace in the hole, a technique known as powerful sword rampage. In a split second, countless fine slashes with flawless precision rained down on the hideous monster without mercy. It was the ultimate technique in terms of power and speed. The manstalker's face got diced and its meat slid apart, falling off in bloody chunks. She had beaten an unbeatable foe in its own game of speed and strength. Standing at the other side of the destruction she had just caused, she could hardly believe that she did all that. Ku Hien knew it was all thanks to that potion. On top of restoring health, her ether consumption was essentially zero. Thanks to that, she was able to use powerful sword rampage for 10 seconds, even though her maximum limit was supposed to be just 3 seconds. If all of this was due to the potion she had just hurriedly picked up from a random shop, then this could be big. The biggest question in her mind now was, what in the world is that little shop? What the hell is that kind and always smiling owner hiding? The next day arrived and it was pretty much business as usual in the little Sector 7 Hunter store. That was, until the customer bell on the door chimed its welcoming sound. Everyone in the store, including the owner Yugji, had their attention stolen by the person who entered. The sword witch didn't mince words. And it was as if the other customers didn't even exist in her vision. She made a beeline directly to the owner. She grabbed him by the shoulder, almost as if afraid that he might run away, and asked, "What the hell was that potion you sold me?" Ku Hien is a superstar. Virtually every hunter in the country, let alone the city, knows who she is. Also, the news of her slaying a manstalker had already been so exaggerated that some accounts said she devastated a whole swarm. Now that she noticed other people were nearby, she tried to compose herself and apologize to Yugji for being rude. She insisted that there was a problem with the potion. The problem was that she had never seen a potion that could heal 14% of max health and eliminate ether costs for skills entirely. Even Yugji himself had already seen the uploaded clip, the one of her eliminating an aversion-ranked monster on her own using an amazing series of powerful moves. She kept clarifying that she wasn't the impressive one in that clip, it was the special potion. She just wanted to know where Yugji got it, or if he brewed it himself. He was quite prepared to answer any questions regarding his special brew by simply showing her the secret ingredient, the ripe, golden solar apple. The story he decided to go with was that he stumbled upon the solar apple in a Tier 1 dungeon. That detail, however, was too hard to believe. Even the sword witch herself had to pause and seriously consider whether solar apples were really common enough to spawn in the least dangerous dungeon. Yugji thought that revealing the details about the forest could go very wrong, very quickly. So for now he would just make some excuses. Still, as the one who made it, he was genuinely happy that his potion helped the sword witch. She noticed something as she looked around the limited space of the shop. She spotted another batch of interesting potions. The contents were blue this time. She took one to inspect up close and asked him what the effects were. He casually explained that it gives 32% ice resistance that lasts for 40 minutes. Hearing that description almost took Ku Hien out. She's a combat veteran, and she was certain that the best quality ice resistance potion in the market only gives 10% resistance and lasts 15 minutes max. This potion was miles better in every way possible. When asked where he found it, Yua started searching for another excuse in his mind. In reality, he had just harvested another type of plant growing in the mysterious forest. Level 1 winter strawberries can already provide 20% ice resistance for 30 minutes on their own. He took just enough of them to brew a batch of experimental ice resistance potions. Yuji enjoys the process of brewing these potions. With his alchemy skill in full display, he whipped up a whole batch, which caused his alchemical skill to jump to the second level. But when faced with questions about his methods, his go-to excuse was that he found the ingredients in a Tier 0 dungeon. The Sword Witch could see that this guy was just a bad liar. Seeing that he wanted to keep his business a secret, she didn't pry any further, noticing how uncomfortable the owner was. However, she would like to buy all of these new ice resistance potions. She would even pay in cash. For a high-ranking hunter, pulling out a wad of paper money was no big deal. She didn't even need a receipt. Yuji tried to say that the amount was way too much for just a few potions, but if you ask her, she knew that her cash wasn't even nearly enough for potions of this quality. Before going through the door, she finally asked him what his name was. He gave it with no fuss. Yua. She liked it. Yua had a nice ring to her ears. Before actually leaving the premises, the Sword Witch playfully told him that they'd see each other again next time. Back inside the mysterious forest, the place itself was starting to look better and better. He had been regularly harvesting glowstones, kindle gems, and his winter strawberry basket was in need of a refill after the Sword Witch's bulk buying. But he could just walk up and get some more. The glowstones and kindle gems were new finds for Yua. There were just so many precious resources in this forest. Without the threat of any dangerous monsters, he was reaping the benefits. Yet even now he still had no clue about what or where this place was. He had gotten so used to the tranquil silence of the greenery that even a tiny sound of movement behind the foliage caught his attention. Yua was put on high alert. He was certain that he didn't hear that sound wrong. There was something lurking behind the bushes. Upon looking all over the place, he saw the source. Shock and curiosity were the chief emotions he felt at that moment. He had just happened upon a cute beetle-like creature, with pincers in place of limbs. The system identified it as a Turtura drone, a mythic monster as big as a small car. It resembled a beetle, but sported its signature giant claws. He knew of the creature known as Padrone. Mythic creatures are few and far between, after all. Right now he wasn't just seeing one, he was actually seeing several of them walking around. Contrary to their described size of being as big as a small car, these guys were tiny. Another bizarre thing was a transparent synthetic wall that he couldn't pass through in this part of the land. The Turtura drones were grouping up and hastily heading for something. That something was a group of devil ants, hazard-ranked, cargo truck-sized monsters. Killing one attracts 10 more, making them supremely difficult to deal with. The Turtura drones were actually going up against some powerful foe for some unknown reason. Ya could only watch from behind the synthetic barrier, recalling what he had read about devil ants in one of his old books. They are true blue hazard-ranked monsters, but the poison they emit makes them even more dangerous than some aversion-ranked monsters. Throughout this whole ordeal, one glaring issue stood out. The system prompts kept telling him that these creatures were all supposed to be gigantic. But looking at them now, they just looked like tiny bugs engaging in increasingly intense combat. The Turtura drones were on the back foot. They were being absolutely demolished by the devil ants. These adorable Turtura drones were trying to pick a fight, and losing. Most of them weren't even really fighters. Yua could only wonder what was making them do this. Seeing that the charming creatures were about to get steamrolled, he wanted to find a way to help them. As if the heavens heard his worries, a system prompt appeared asking him if he wanted to help his own Turtura drone legion in this war. That alone implied that he could directly intervene in something he didn't even fully understand. The prompt also said that these were his Turtura drones, implying that the mythical creatures were under him. It's in Yuji's nature to feel inclined to press the yes button to help the Terra drones in their struggle. His legion was losing hard right now, but he could use his essence to cast an area buff. There were 4 choices. Increase HP by 30% for 1 hour. Increase poison resistance by 40% for 1 hour. Increase physical resistance by 30% for 1 hour. Each of these costs 1 essence. The last choice costs 2 essence, and it simply grants the laborer's blessing. Helping them directly would be impossible with the synthetic barrier in place. A shield was on the way, but giving assistance through these options was the next best thing. He currently had 2 essences on him. The fourth option was the most expensive out of all the choices, so Yua wanted to choose that one. As soon as he confirmed the bestowment of the laborer's blessing, it was as if every stat the Tertura drones possessed was bolstered by divine intervention. They gained a much-needed physical augmentation and a valuable morale boost. It didn't take long before the devil ants were absolutely smoked. The Tertura drones quickly turned the tables. They didn't just turn the tables, they smashed them right over the ants' faces. These beetle boys actually minced the devils up so hard that they lost their creepy crawlers. Yua celebrated on the sidelines, proud of his soul legion for winning the war. He couldn't believe that he had just seen some mythical creatures prevail over adversity. With his help, he personally thanked the Tertura drones for standing up for their principles and protecting the forest. As he was praising them for their good work, Yua noticed that these little dudes were gathering something. They were offering up a whole lot of essence and east stones. He smiled at the Tertura drone legion's generosity and thanked them for thinking of him. Unfortunately, the Tertura drones didn't seem to understand what he was trying to say. In the end, he simply took 5 essences and 5 essence stones each. He wanted to leave the rest of the precious resources to the little guys who had actually fought with their lives on the line. This much was already good enough for him. At that moment, the transparent synthetic barrier slowly dissolved into nothing. Now that the wall was gone, the accessible area of the mysterious forest increased drastically. Likewise, the fog lifted too. He had initially planned to stay only for a bit and do some harvesting today, but it was starting to look like he wouldn't be going back for a while. Exploration now takes precedence. After the appearance of dungeons and hunters, something special was established to connect all the hunters in the world. A community for hunters, by hunters, formerly known as the Hunter Net. Right now, the discussions on the Hunter Net were centered around one person and one video clip. Hunter Rank 12, the fierce sword witch Xiao Hian. Someone in a dark office was currently browsing the Hunter Net for information. She had long, fiery red hair and a stalwart aura, but tonight she was on her anonymous account with a red avatar, arguing that there should be no dispute whatsoever regarding the sword witch soloing the manstalker. Another anonymous user using a blue avatar argued that there was a valid case to be made. It should be impossible for Hyan to do something as incredulous as solo killing a manstalker without help. That really ticked off Red. You could almost sense how heated she got just by the increase in her typing speed. Blue kept arguing about the number of people entering the dungeon. Red fired back, bringing up the fact that Hyan had been a solo player ever since Han Xing-yuku mysteriously disappeared. Red maintained a stoic expression, but she was clearly locked in. Blue replied that they honestly hoped the sword witch would just forget about that Xing-yuku guy, adding that she couldn't keep missing someone who disappeared forever. That really pushed the wrong buttons in Red's mind. This stranger she had been anonymously arguing with could only talk trash like this because it wasn't their burden to carry. Red tried to explain that Hyan's significant other disappeared in a dungeon, and she had every right to miss him for as much and as long as she wanted. Her calm demeanor was gone, now she was just outright pissed. Blue made it even worse by replying that it had been 3 years since the incident, as if grief had a cooldown timer. In those 3 years, all she had done was repeatedly enter one dungeon in hopes of finding him again. Red wanted to make her point clear, but even anonymous Blue began to realize that it wasn't a good idea to talk about a missing person like that, unless you're Xiao Hian herself. This stranger had crossed so many lines that Red just wanted to break something. Suddenly the dark room lit up with bright office lights. A deep voice asked Red if she was a zombie for getting into the habit of browsing the net in the dark, an activity bad for the eyes but even worse for the brain. The dignified man who just entered was known as Choi Chan, the top alchemist of the Eternal Flame Guild. Red insisted she could concentrate better in the dark, while stretching after spending an ungodly amount of time surfing the web. Choi Chan had returned to report something he had checked out in person. His assignment was the lowest-ranked hunter with no traits. You're the one who runs the hunter store. As expected, Chan didn't feel anything special from the guy. Red was ready to dismiss the matter, concluding that Yoa had nothing to do with Xiao Hian getting stronger at an unbelievable pace and degree. But Chan wasn't finished with the report yet. He had inspected the wares and noticed that the store was selling something special. something that involved solar apples. Even Red had a vague idea of what those delicious golden treasures were. They were items that drastically reduced aether usage, and even the Eternal Flame Guild's top alchemist had never seen one in person. The shocking part was, Yua had brewed a potion from such a valuable ingredient, and was selling those potions at a very cheap price. Chan concluded that there were two possible assumptions behind this bizarre situation. Ria doesn't know the real value of solar apples. 2. Chan didn't even have to say the second one. The second assumption made Red's clever smile appear. It might just be the right one. Could it be that the mysterious Yua is a person without an ounce of greed? Since she needed some fresh air anyway, Red decided to check the store out personally and see the shop owner herself. Choan insisted on calling the car, but she refused. She's not a CEO or anything that flashy. Having a car driving her around feels like too much. She might have a point. She's not exactly a CEO, but she's still in a similar position. Red is Chakwa Yun, the Eternal Flame Guild Master. Back in the mysterious forest, Yua had made himself comfortable in the middle of all the greenery by making a small bonfire. The deeper he pushed into the forest, the colder it had gotten. It was a good thing he brought his light. The wall and fog that had blocked the inner forest had dissipated, opening up new possibilities. He looked around, but there wasn't much of a big difference from the first area he came from. Of course, he hadn't yet explored the perimeter fully. He was blocked from proceeding further by an ominous aura coming from a certain spot deeper in the forest. That place just seemed too dangerous. He could feel his fight or flight response getting triggered near it. Yua didn't want to put himself in danger just for the sake of curiosity, so heading back seemed like the reasonable choice for now. Just as he was about to get up and leave, his legion of adorable Tertera drones started meekly approaching him. All of them had worried looks on their faces, and were each carrying a mysterious plant seed. These Tertera drones had been carrying mist-chasing flower seeds all over the place to help get rid of the fog. Apart from the ones he saw during the Devil Ant War, Yua noticed a new face, a shy pterodon that was larger than the rest. He seemed a little different, so he might be their leader or representative. Now that he was seeing the bigger picture, it looked like these little guys had just come out of the ominous place at the heart of the forest. Suddenly, another system prompt popped up in front of Yua. This time it was a Terrata drone request, a mission to rescue their queen. These creatures apparently have queens, just like ants and bees. It seemed the mist-chasing flower seeds were an offering before asking for his help. Yua was moved by their current situation. Besides, these little guys had been protecting the forest thus far, so he promised to do what he could. He admitted he was a little scared, but he'd lend a helping hand. He patted the big pterodon on the head, assuring them that they would do the rescue operation tomorrow. For now, there were preparations to be made. The next day came, and Yua stood by his promise. He used the bountiful resources of the mysterious forest to brew another batch of healing potions, a batch of poison resistance potions, and prepared a healthy portion of combat rations. Yua poured all of these into their respective tiny bowls and let the Terra drones feast on them like a pre-game feast for war. Now that the basic preparations were done, adding an area buff like last time should make dealing with the devil ants easier. With his legion pumped up with feeds and brood boosters, their morale was sky high and their prowess even higher. When Yua ordered them to fly forth just like before, he remained in the back lines. As expected, the source of the ominous feeling deep in the forest was something the Tertera drones were very familiar with. It was a collection, a system of devil ant hives. The mother lode. This was the place where those pesky devil ants resided and prospered. For the first time in a while, there was something big enough to intimidate Yua. Each of these mountains of killer ants stood at least 3 meters tall. When the Tertera drones finally got close to the hives, they were greeted by the full force of the devil ant security team. These monsters immediately used one of their more lethal tricks, poison excretion, releasing toxins into the atmosphere. But with Yua's help and ample preparations, it looked like the little guys were up for the challenge. The war between the Pira drones and the devil ants had officially begun. With their stats bolstered to a new level, the beetle-like mythical beasts made quick work of the devil ants' first wave. It was a close fight overall, but the Terra drones were superior in sheer will. Thanks to Yua's preparations, his legion was clearly doing much better than they did last time. But not all of them could be outstanding fighters from the start. They were still in danger, especially on enemy turf. Yua was then notified that he could assist his legion with his power, but it would be limited to a one-time use. The next prompt offered an option. Put the winged devil ants back on the ground with a strong slap. It would cost him 3 essences, one-time help in the form of a slap. In a situation like this, it felt ridiculous. He didn't even know what he was supposed to do with such a silly choice. Then the solution to his problem presented itself. A winged devil ant emerged from their lair. These specialized members of the hive acted as messengers, capable of flight. The devil ant army was essentially trying to recall the main force back to the hive. Yua now had the chance to stop them with a single slap. He sighed, said whatever, and accepted the blessing from the system. As he clenched his palm, the winged devil ant began its urgent flight to call on the bulk of the army and end the war with the Pterodura drones. The drone, once and for all, felt so confident that the flight would go on without a hitch, that it forgot to check above for any anomalous figures looming around. Yua brought down his hand like the might of a giant god and slapped the clueless flying ant into smithereens. This was his one-time assistance to his Torterra drone legion, killing ants in classic style, a proper punishment for annoying pests. Taking a day out of her busy schedule, Hwa-yeon decided to visit Yugji's store. After inspecting the building that sold sun apples up and down, she didn't notice anything supernatural. Externally it was unremarkable and had nothing special, but you can't judge a book by its cover. No one knows what secrets might be stored inside. Hwa-yeon had said that she defeated a stalker after shopping here, so Hwa-yeon couldn't go by such vague information. Now she was even more eager to uncover the secrets of this place. She was in a great mood and had a huge pile of questions she wanted to ask the shopkeeper. But when she pulled the door handle, it was closed. After tugging a few more times, she made sure she wasn't imagining things and began looking around. It was odd that the sign was flipped to open, but maybe the owner had just stepped away for a while. She might need to wait a bit. But that bit could drag on for hours. Turning to the old man who had originally cleaned the site, she asked about the store's hours of operation. However, the man didn't know the exact time, even though it used to open on time and close late in the evening. Unfortunately, for the past few days, the potion store had changed its schedule. The owner had started opening the store less often. This time, the doors had remained closed since yesterday, and no one knew what the problem was. In the end, the old man muttered that young people were getting lazier every year, then turned his back and continued cleaning in the other direction. This information completely contradicted what Hwa-yeon had previously received. She had been told they only closed on weekends. A glance at the wooden signboard displaying a potion vial convinced her of her suspicion. Anyone hearing about the sudden change in opening hours would think of something fishy. As expected of Yugji, he was up to something. Meanwhile, our hero used the system's gifted opportunity to participate in the Torterra drone battles and resented how little he could do. However, it should have been enough to bring them closer to victory. This wasn't even his war after all. Besides, eliminating the messenger wasn't bad revenue either. Of course, the devil ants didn't like this turn of events, and their motivation was fading. Looking at the reinforced Torterra drones, it was immediately clear what the battle's outcome would be. Their armor had become stronger, and their strength had grown far beyond its original level. That's why when attacked, the ants fled, emptying the clearing. Sighing a breath of relief, Yua sat down on the ground and covered his eyes. This war was mentally exhausting for him. Meanwhile, the Torterra drones began running around him, happy that they had managed something incredible. However, their queen was still inside the anthill and she had to be rescued somehow. Remember, here comes the sun. Turning his head toward the anthill, he wondered what was going on. The Torterra drones had rescued her themselves. They had even managed to create a stretcher. Their development was clearly at a high level, even without evolution. Raising her head a little, the queen looked at her savior and began to express her gratitude. With the help of her subordinates, she managed to rise to her feet and bowed to Yua for rescuing her and supporting their settlement. He was naturally happy about it, but forcing a sick creature to bow wasn't his style, so he gently stroked her and told her that everything was fine and she could rest in peace. He was genuinely glad that she was unharmed. Looking at the situation from the outside, one might compare him to an angel descending from heaven. Nevertheless, the system window informed him that the Terra drone queen wished to swear allegiance to him. If he signed the contract, he would sponsor her group and receive several items, with the stipulation that Yua would have to fulfill their requests. Fortunately, he didn't have to think twice. He gladly accepted the queen's offer. After acknowledging the loyalty of the queen and her troops, the system notified him that he could now supply their squad directly. At that same moment, General Pterodon suddenly began to emit a bright light and absorb energy from the environment, changing form. He had managed to evolve thanks to the agreement he had signed. His appearance changed noticeably. Not only did his claws become larger and stronger, but his chitinous shell also reinforced the quality of his armor. Yua watched the transformation with a smile on his face, marveling at how powerful his ally had become. Now the Terradrone general began to live up to his name, standing out from the otherwise uniform surroundings of his fellow drones. After circling above Yua's head for a moment, he raised his large claw and signaled the rest of the group to get ready. At that moment they began carrying golden essence ingots and ether stones, ignoring Yua's earlier insistence that he didn't need so much. Examining the two large piles of consumables, he decided to only take 10 pieces of each, and leave the rest to the Terra drones. Besides, he already had something very valuable. The general had brought it to him before the battle. He took out two. He pulled seeds of different colors from his pocket and examined them. The purple one was immediately recognizable. It was a wild grape, but the green one was more difficult to identify. He couldn't immediately figure out what kind of fruit tree seed it was, so he left it for later. After getting up from the ground and shaking off his clothes, the protagonist decided that he would find out what it was when it grew, and the forest would take care of the rest. Yua had begun to appear in this forest too often, so after looking around he decided it was time to build a hut. The very next day, a new gate to the dungeon opened, which the people did not miss out on. Seeing it, a group of hunters passed through the gate without delay. Looking for bait, one of them asked Hennim if he was sure the Queen of the Ants was here. Hennim wrinkled his nose a little and instead of yelling at the fool, calmed down and replied that he wasn't crazy enough to enter the dungeon of the devil ants. Besides, if they managed to loot the anthill properly, then everyone in the squad could earn a decent amount of money as a reward. However, his interlocutor immediately stopped in place and pointed forward, not understanding what was happening. It seemed to him that the dungeon had already been cleared, but Hennim dismissed it as nonsense. The gate had just opened. Once close enough to the anthill, even the omniscient squad leader was greatly surprised by what he saw. The anthill was indeed empty, which confused many people. Entering a new dungeon that no one had yet cleared usually meant facing a huge number of monsters and the potential for precious loot, but today's dungeon was fundamentally different. Someone assumed that it had been cleared in another area, but that turned out to be a foolish guess. Everyone knew that a past dungeon does not open twice. The commander himself couldn't believe it, but the nonsense turned out to be true. No one knew who had cleared the anthill, but looking at the traces left behind, it was obvious that someone had already fought them. To top it all off, the ants were nowhere to be seen. This put an end to any speculation. The commander ordered everyone to immediately shut up and look for tracks, refusing to believe they had all disappeared. At that moment, someone in the group looked down and cried out in surprise. Hennim leaned down, irritated, not understanding why he was yelling and scaring the others. As it turned out, the group of hunters had unknowingly been standing on a giant palm print, one big enough to fit 20 people. The entire group instantly gathered into a heap, trembling with fear. It was hard to believe that something huge existed in this dungeon, something capable of leaving such a massive footprint. There had been no reports of a monster like that. If it was a monster, it might be one of destruction rank, a creature clearly beyond the capabilities of the hunters who had entered. and not something matching the dungeon's supposed rank. Gnashing his teeth in fear, the commander realized they wouldn't be able to handle the monster that had destroyed the devil ants. If they let their guard down even for a moment, they might be killed before they could even react. Heeding his advice, the group decided to retreat and contact the association to report the footprint. There was no fool among them who wanted to stay there. Soon everyone left the dungeon. Having fulfilled their mission, they handed over all the information to the guild, with photos as proof. The head of the guild took the situation as an emergency and immediately began evaluating the handprint that had been sent. He was told that it was found near the Devil Anthill, but that wasn't the strangest part. The secretary added that the hunters had ended up in a scavenged dungeon, which was supposed to be impossible. After listening and reviewing the evidence, the heir to the Goro group, Kim Hong-suk, ordered that he be notified of any new developments related to the case. Reasoning over the print, he immediately realized that this wasn't the hand of an ordinary monster, but the print wasn't large enough to indicate a completely new species either. Perhaps this monster belonged to a mythical rank, a classification few people even knew about. But what if a creature above destruction rank had appeared? Strange things had been happening more and more frequently, and Kim Hong-suk was growing increasingly concerned about the fate of the country. Standing up from his chair, he walked over to the window and looked out at the city, remembering the horrors people had once experienced. He couldn't allow them to happen again. He decided to put all his efforts into this matter. Meanwhile, Yeo was quietly trading in his store, unaware of what was going on in the mind of the guild leader, who also didn't know about the war between the pterodon and the devil ants. The weather was fine in Seoul that day, so Yugji closed the store for a while and went to Area 5. There, he stood quietly under a building with an intercom, waiting for the person he had previously arranged to meet. Fortunately, the wait wasn't long. After being called out, he immediately turned his head toward the source of the sound and smiled. Running in his direction was a beautiful girl, carrying a book under her arm. She greeted him and winked. She apologized for the delay and said he could have just gone inside and waited. However, that wasn't a problem for him. So our hero simply asked her not to run, worried that she might fall. As he expected, she immediately found herself on the ground. Consider him a prophet, but he just knew her too well. After all, this wasn't the first time she had fallen like this. Yugji approached her and asked about her condition, but she quickly said that the book was intact and there was nothing to worry about, then started to get up from her knees. However, that wasn't what he meant at all, but he didn't bother to correct her. That clumsy girl was Hwang Sang, the only huntress with origami skills in South Korea. Smiling awkwardly, she scratched the back of her head and began to justify her fall, saying that she hadn't exercised in a long time and had even forgotten how to walk. There were a lot of differences between her and Yugji, but the fact that Wang's son Sun Young turned out to be a bookworm united their interests. Holding out a green-wrapped box to her, he handed her breakfast from Jimmy, asking her to take care of it. Wang Sun-young was surprised that this was the only reason our hero had come to her, but upon catching a whiff of the food, she thanked him for his concern. As she took the box into her arms, she realized something was holding her back. Remembering the book, she held it out to Yugji. Last time she had gone to the store looking for a new story, but that day his manager had been rather sad. As it turned out, people were buying this book as a piece of decoration, then coming back and demanding a refund. It was quite beautiful and stylish, so even though it was useless, they still bought it as a gift. Wang Sun-young thought the book would go well with the main character's interior, so she gave it to Yugji. The fact that it was being returned seemed strange, but he still accepted the gift. Feeling some sort of power in his hands, he looked at it and was a bit surprised by what started to happen afterward. The object exuded a muted green color, so one could guess it wasn't just a piece of paper. A system notification announced that he had received an endless spellbook, but in order to write something in it he would need to use petrol quill and ink. Turning to Wang Sun-young, he decided to clarify whether this book was indeed just a common decoration, but the answer was what he expected. She also thought the rumors about it were strange, but there really wasn't anything written inside. Besides, she had also tried to leave her own notes there, but that idea had failed as well. The manager must have tried to test the power of the book, but when it didn't work, he decided to use it as a decoration. Yuji was stunned by what he heard. Why did the information window pop up for him then? Most likely the system simply didn't show her any data, which caused her to give it away without asking for anything in return. Our hero looked at her suspiciously, thinking about this, but she misunderstood and thought that he wasn't pleased with the gift. She was ready to take the book back. However, it turned out to be quite the opposite. After saying that he liked the book, Hwang Sun-young was very happy that she had managed to give him something worthwhile. Looking at such a valuable book, he promised that he would use it to the fullest. He didn't know anything about it, but no one forbade experimentation. After saying goodbye to Hwang Sun-young, our hero returned to his store, where he opened the book and tried writing in it. As he had been told earlier, it was not possible to leave notes, neither with a pen nor with pencils. The information mentioned that he would need a petrol quill and ink. Somehow he would have to find information about the petrol, but there was a small problem. The petrol is a bird that is rarely seen, usually in various desert areas, except in the oceans of the polar desert. In addition, it has a wingspan of approximately 25 meters. It was hard to imagine fighting against such an enormous bird. Looking at its size, Yuji immediately realized that killing it and taking a feather would not be an easy task. On top of that, it was rare, which meant it would take more than a day to hunt. Giving up without even trying, our hero still decided to make the book a decoration, just as the bookstore manager had suggested. However, as soon as he put his hand on the page, particles of magic and system windows appeared in the air, granting him the skills of good handwriting and ancient magic. Yuji couldn't believe that he had been given a new trait and didn't realize what the ability was for at first. Squeezing his palm, he tested the gifted power but felt nothing. However, the fact that he had managed to obtain it couldn't be a mere coincidence. Taking the pencil from the nightstand in his hand, he tried writing on the usual yellowed pages. This time, the protagonist succeeded. The few lines he wrote raised his good handwriting skill level to level 2. After receiving his new ability, Yuji tried out many things and learned a few facts. He still couldn't write in the spellbook, even after mastering such a useful trait. 2. His handwriting had now gained elegance, as if he had graduated from a calligraphy school. In a way, it was a useful trait. Before, he wrote like a chicken scratching with its paw. But now anyone could understand his words. As he looked at what he had written and thought about where he could apply it, his heart suddenly pounded loudly in his chest, making him nervous. This state lasted only a few seconds, but it made our hero extremely alert. He didn't understand what had happened, but Yuji quickly guessed what was about to occur. So he literally flew out the door of the store in a second. As expected, a portal opened up right next to his shop. It looked like it was alerting people. The parameters of the portal said that it was of 0 rank. It was for working-class people, and it would be open for only an hour. After reading this information, our hero could not believe his eyes. Encountering such a gate seemed like unprecedented luck. It was as if the portal was meant only for him, and it led directly to the petrol. Could it be because of the beautiful handwriting skill? Yuji had a black viscous aura that scared people, but if he was a rank 0, it might be alright. All one had to do was cross the threshold and find out. However, going there empty-handed was too reckless. Even though he was a rank 0, he was on a direct path to a huge bird. Therefore, after returning to his store, Yuji gathered the things he needed and entered another dimension. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Huge waterfalls surrounded by forests created a rainbow over the surface, mesmerizing in its brilliance. This location was perfect for the petrel's habitat. Just thinking about it, he heard the cry of a bird of prey behind him. As it approached, anyone with an instinct for self-preservation would have run and hidden in the bushes, but the protagonist stayed put, shackled by fear. Her eyes burned red, and her feathers developed a dark aura, intimidating her victim. Just as the information said, the storm petrel appeared to be of enormous size. Looking up, our hero could not believe that he had managed to see such a rare, massive bird in reality, one the size of a building. However, the question of how to catch it was still unanswered, which made him want to sob, feeling something soft touch his face. Yuji opened his eyes and looked at the blue feather slowly descending downward. As it turned out, the storm petrel had thrown off a dozen feathers and quietly flown back to its nest, leaving our hero alive. He was incredibly lucky, so he quickly began to collect the items into his backpack, not missing a single feather in sight. Now it was just a matter of finding ink. Luckily, he already had an idea where to get it. Without expending any effort, he paid a visit to the Pura drones, who were kind enough to share the green liquid they made from an extract of green herbs. Even Yugji was surprised at how quickly they had found it, but he was glad he had reached out to them. After inspecting the flask, he thanked them for their assistance and placed it in his pocket. All the necessary items had been found, so he could begin the experiment. All that remained was to unravel the mystery of the endless spellbook, which he had prudently brought with him. Crouching on the nearest rock, our hero dipped his quill into the calligraphy rod. He wondered what riddle the book held, and made a few strokes. Since no one had any idea what it could do, he had to solve its mystery himself. As soon as he touched the book with his quill, the letters literally turned into yellow symbols that swirled around him. After flying for a bit, they settled on one of the nearby trees where they recreated the full text of the message. As it turned out, they were runes that shimmered with golden light, surprising Yugji in the process. In an old book he had read about a great tree that taught people 4 spells: creation, harmony, change, and destruction. But this power was hard to control, so runes were developed. The world tree gave them knowledge, but ancient magic was difficult to manage, so they created runic words to apply magic. However, our hero had never heard of anyone actually using runes. It seemed he had managed to discover something new, a knowledge previously unknown to him. What he saw in the forest turned out to be exactly that, an elaborate cipher. As one could guess, they appear if certain conditions are met. But why were they engraved on the tree and not in the spellbook? Come to think of it, this was the exact tree Yugji had revived when he first came to the forest. It was hard to believe that such a small, almost withered sprout was a world tree. However, that wasn't what mattered right now. It was unclear whether the runes would disappear in the future, so the protagonist decided to write them in the book. It was the first time he had seen these inscriptions, but somehow it seemed as if he knew the meaning of each of them. Destruction, the fire that will set everything ablaze, read the inscription on the tree trunk. Copying each rune into the spellbook, our hero noted that the spell contained some very harsh phrases. At that moment, the system notified him that the scroll of change had gained the power of destruction, which increased the destructive power of rune magic. The book itself filled with fire that did not burn and transformed the written lines into a scroll. Yugji did not want to do that, as the book would quickly thin and become useless. However, there was no choice, the theory had to be tested. Rolling it up and tying it with a red ribbon created a spell scroll that was quite convenient to use. Such a product would sell well in his store, so the protagonist decided to write another 99 scrolls while there was still time. He was about to reach for the book to continue his work, but it began to exude power. The torn-off sheet reappeared in the book as if nothing had ever been removed. This could only mean one thing: the spell book was truly endless. With such a marvelous item, one would never have to worry about money again. Yugji even had plenty of ink, so he could make as many scrolls as he wanted. The only problem was that he didn't know what their properties were. It was only stated that they increased the destructive power of rune magic. Since our hero was not a mage, there was no way to test it unless he gave it to a magician and learned from their feedback. Just that day, such a person came to his store. Right after Yugji returned home, standing before him was Chapwayan herself, in full uniform and holding a staff with a scarlet crystal behind her. Seeing our hero at the table, she quickly stepped toward him, not hiding the anger on her face. She hit the table hard with her hand, and the entire store groaned at the sound of her blow. Turning to him, she irritably remarked that Yugji was hard to track down. He had no idea how many times she had come to see him, but he knew one thing for sure: she was just like Hajin in Sasai. Apologizing for his absence, the protagonist explained that the store had been closed for personal reasons. It didn't open as often as it used to. After evaluating his appearance, she agreed with Chilhen's words that Yua was an unremarkable person. While she was assessing him, the man shivered in sweat from her fearful gaze, pondering what he had managed to do wrong. It wasn't a problem for Chakwayan that he was useless after all. She hadn't come for him at all. Looking around the shelves behind our hero, she examined the quality of his potions that made Hyujin stronger. After coughing a bit, she apologized for her behavior and said that she should have considered the fact that he might have his reasons. After that, she pulled out her wallet, from which she took her business card. Changing her expression to a more welcoming one, she handed him the card, which had a red image of a coat of arms on it, and introduced herself as the head of the Eternal Flame Guild. After explaining that she had received information that he possessed unique items, she told him she had come to verify the rumors in person. Yugji immediately realized it must be about the sun apple, which made their negotiations much easier. After all, he was not only selling the apple but also the winter strawberry potion, which simplified battles in many dungeons. Right now they were in high demand and selling like hotcakes, so it was no surprise that she had come to him. After asking for a few minutes, he started looking for items on the shelves. As Cha Huayun had mentioned earlier, she'd had a few bad experiences coming to him, so he wanted to offer something on the house. This surprised her. It was wild, considering they weren't in a market and were talking about rather expensive products. However, she didn't have to turn them down either. Turning toward her, our hero turned pale and didn't know what to say. Due to some circumstances, he had run out of all the potions, which he regretted greatly. Yua had gotten too engrossed and neglected his work because of the incident with the Tira drones and the endless spellbook. Even he had begun to doubt whether he was really a shopkeeper. After all, he had never run out of anything before. A little upset, the protagonist asked Cha Huayun to come back tomorrow when they were ready. From the situation, she was missing all the words she originally wanted to say. It took her a long time to decide whether he was kind or just stupid, but that wouldn't make the goods appear. Since they were out, nothing could be done. Turning toward the door, she frustratedly dragged her feet toward the exit. She had wanted badly to use the items in the dungeon she was heading to today, but she'd now have to come back tomorrow. Luckily, remembering the scrolls he had made, he stopped her and asked about her skill. By the looks of it, it was clear she was skilled in fire magic, but he still decided to ask, and his guesses were confirmed. Holding out his own handmade spell, Yugji asked her to use it as compensation for her time. Cha Huayun was greatly surprised when he handed her a plain scroll, but the protagonist explained that he had only made it yesterday as a test sample. He was sorry to let her go empty-handed, so he decided to give it to the mage. Since she was so kindly offered an alternative, there was no reason to refuse. Opening the paper, it lit up with a bright flame, similar to her hair. After reading the words on the scroll, "Your fire will set everything on fire," Cha Huayun began to play with the flames. Luckily, she liked both the phrase and the gift she had received so unexpectedly. After saying goodbye to each other, she closed the doors and headed toward her team. However, as she was leaving, Yugji noticed that her staff had changed slightly. The sickle-shaped end with a core inside began to brightly emit an orange light. Had it shone like this originally? Meanwhile, Cha Huayun met up with her team and entered the Spider Girl dungeon. The guardian monster was destroyed rather quickly, but the squad leader told them not to relax and to stick to formation, occasionally looking around. As expected, fire magic worked perfectly against the insects, turning them into ash. As she continued to run forward, she tried to keep up the group's enthusiasm, praising them little by little. If they kept working like this, getting to the center would be easy enough. All the while, as she fought the monsters, she noticed that her strength was greater than usual. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could clearly see the runestone raging. Cha Huayun stayed on her guard the entire time, but as soon as she let her thoughts wander for a second, she found herself under attack. Luckily, she was warned in time, which allowed her to jump aside and avoid the viscous liquid the spider girls were spitting. The man who had warned her was excited about the incident and quickly asked how she was, but all seemed fine. There was one threat, however, that could have caused their operation to fail. As it turned out, there were far more monsters than the report had indicated. The man explained that there were a lot of changing factors in this dungeon, so it was not always possible to accurately determine its condition. But what to do next, retreat or regroup? After thinking about it for a bit, Cha Huayun ordered them to forget about it and continue the offensive. Of course, everyone was worried about the condition of the guild manager's head and didn't want her to overdo it, but this time was very different. They didn't have to worry about her today. Thanks to the scroll, her strength had increased several times, and she was now capable of doing anything. Raising her staff into the air, she spoke the words of the scroll, then the runes began to flow together, creating a powerful attack that no one had ever seen from her before. Huayun ordered everyone to immediately fall back if they didn't want to be hit. Pointing her weapon in front of her, she directed the magic surged forward, whereupon a huge stream of flames began to incinerate every living thing that came under its influence. Every spider girl that was exposed to the fire began squirming in agony as it ate through the entire forest. It was over very quickly, after which a squad of hunters began to cheer for Huayun. No one knew how much she had raised her skill level, but they were sure that, at this rate, they would succeed in destroying everyone. To some extent, even she herself could not believe her power and stood still for a while looking at the scepter. She had an idea as to why this was happening, but it was a bit hard to believe. Could a scroll created by an ordinary worker really be capable of such a thing? As Yugji had promised, the next day he prepared a case of the required potions, spending the entire night making them. Looking at his labor, he estimated the size of the order, trying to determine the right amount, just in case. He made both sun apple potions and winter strawberry potions. When placed side by side, it felt as if day and night were facing each other with their yellow and blue colors. Leaving the box on the table, our hero looked at the wall where a clock hung. It showed 7:30. The only thing left to do was pack the goods before Huayun arrived, as she had said she would come early in the morning. So he hurried. After a while, the bell hanging on the door rang loudly, announcing a visitor. As it turned out, it was Huayun, to whom he happily informed that he had just prepared the potions she had requested yesterday. This time, however, she didn't come alone. Behind her stood a man in a business suit, presumably a member of her guild. Huayun had thought it appropriate to discuss the elixir later, but now she wanted to talk about a more delicate topic. There was no point in refusing her, but deep in his heart, Yugji harbored some worry about the scroll he had given away yesterday. Fortunately, his fear was not justified. Now in front of his face lay a large briefcase filled with a huge pile of money. Yugji didn't understand what was going on, so he sat on the chair in deep shock, asking what it was. The guild leader calmly replied that it was money. Looking at his reaction, she even assumed that he was the type of person obsessed with money or maybe not interested in it at all. Of course, that didn't explain why he was selling potions at such a low price. However, all of this wasn't really about our hero. Feeling nervous about the implication, he replied that everyone likes money. He was just a little surprised when such a large sum was placed on the table. After that, an awkward silence hung in the room. In the quiet, Huayun's voice was enchantingly soft, making it a pleasure to listen to. She began to talk about the scroll that had unexpectedly fallen into her hands. Its effects were unimaginable, and it was of A-class or even S-class quality. She was grateful to have received it for free, but she couldn't just let it go. The protagonist completely understood her feelings. As expected, the endless spell book had made for excellent spells. As she continued the dialogue, she emphasized that if he was uncomfortable receiving such an amount in cash, he could easily have it transferred to his account, whatever suited him. However, what Yugji said next shocked her. After expressing his gratitude, he flatly refused to accept the money. As stated earlier, he had given the scroll as an apology for the long wait. He considered himself an ordinary person and couldn't accept her money. Still, whatever the outcome, she had received the scroll as an experimental item. Huayun couldn't leave the situation unresolved. She remarked that it only takes a few seconds to turn a good person into a stupid one. The secretary, who had been standing next to her the whole time, wanted to stop her, but she continued her speech. Take for example the goose that lays the golden eggs. What would happen if people got it for nothing? Yugji, thinking it was just a reference, briefly replied that everyone would be rich, but the answer was fundamentally wrong. Everyone would immediately know about it, and many would even try to capture the goose, wanting to single-handedly own its riches. Of course, the fact that the protagonist was on the side of the hunters was good news in itself, but at the same time it was no less dangerous. That was why she wanted to make him a rather pleasant and favorable offer. Her eyes instantly shone with fire as she offered him a place in the Eternal Flame Guild. It was quite an unexpected offer that needed proper thought. Chaedwayon had said some harsh things earlier, but that was because she was worried about him. At the same time, she sincerely wanted to attract him to her guild. There would be many people in this world who wanted to deceive him for their own gain, but she wanted to prevent that. Besides, they had brought him a large amount of money to prove that they could properly reward Yujiha's abilities. Eternal Flame was a guild known for its benefits. Yugji replied that they didn't need to go that far to convince him. However, she still wanted to show that such a famous guild would take good care of him. To top it all off, they had many mages but also skilled alchemists. After patting the secretary on the shoulder, she introduced Kohan-si as their chief alchemists, the one supplying them with potions. Besides him, there were other skillful alchemists in the guild, and even they were given plenty of opportunities for experimentation. There were no restrictions on research. As such, if Yugji agreed to join them, the guild would try to match his desired salary. Moreover, Chaedwayon would agree to let him hold the position of chief, or even higher. She did her best to attract him, but our hero only thanked her. Her sparkling words touched him, and he agreed to accept only them as a sign of goodwill. Chaedwayon quickly commanded Chul-Han-si to get the contract out as fast as possible to sign the agreement, but he froze, for he was the first to realize what Yugji had actually said. Literally a second later, she too realized what they had been told, and she was in deep shock at the rejection. She couldn't understand why he didn't agree to what was offered, so she was willing to raise the stakes and make the terms more generous. But for him, everything initially felt too overwhelming. He believed there were more talented people who would be perfect for the position, so he was willing to sacrifice such an expensive opportunity. After saying those words, she was literally boiling with anger and was ready to pounce on him, having spent days pounding into him that he was worthy of the position. The patient Chul-Han-si was the only one holding her back, trying to resolve the situation. However, Chaedwayon was not going to stop. She shouted at the top of her voice, asking Yugji to stop humiliating her. She only managed to keep quiet and calm down when he began to speak, but it was not a pleasant story. He was originally a low-ranked hunter and had no powers whatsoever. He was able to create those potions not because of any special skills, but only because he had been lucky enough to find good friends. He was sure that one day his abilities might disappear, so he wasn't confident that he could continue doing great things for long. In addition, Yugji had become very attached to his little store. Of course, Chaedwayon didn't want to miss out on such a potential hunter, but the judicious Chul-Han-si stopped her. Still, it would be quite difficult for them to change Yugji's mind, so he offered to stop there and show respect for Yugji's wishes. The protagonist was glad when they backed off, but to keep morale high, he replied that he wouldn't forget their advice for the rest of his life and would be extremely careful. That was why he promised to raise the price of the potion she had asked for yesterday. Now they had to be careful with him. Watching this cute situation, Chaedwayon simply laughed. Anyone in the store would have thought she was pushing him to do something bad. However, even though she was still a bit upset by the rejection, there was nothing she could do about it. Later, she warned him not to be afraid to ask for help if he ever found himself in a dangerous situation. Smiling at her warning, Yugji asked her not to worry. If something like that happened, he had something that would warn him. Yugji then pointed to a plant that literally looked like a bell. In addition, it had a similar name, the buzzing bell, which made a sound if a worker was in danger. Since the gate had appeared, the protagonist could no longer spend time in nature. Monsters had managed to take over not only the beach and the sea but even the mountains and valleys. They had adapted so well that it was quite difficult to find a place free of them. Only thanks to the Forest of Dreams was he able to avoid encountering horrible creatures, sometimes finding moral peace there. Even now, strolling along the sandy beach, Yugji finally had the opportunity to sincerely enjoy nature. The waves were humming and crashing against the sand relentlessly, creating soothing sounds. Only the subtle fragrance of the sea, like silk, touched the tip of his nose, making him sneeze. At first the view was indeed beautiful, but it was a bit hot as expected. The sea was the best for relieving headaches. Originally, the protagonist thought there would only be a forest here, but after walking not too far, even the sea had appeared. Now this place looked more like paradise than land. Today he had wanted to do some shopping, but after Shakwayun came in, he got a bad headache that prevented him from working. After that, he felt like he had been robbed of the right to be the owner of his own store, even for a little while, and went into the forest. However, whatever it was, today he wanted to focus on regaining his strength by sunbathing on the beach. Happy for the sudden rest, he promised himself that he would only eat and read. Working with people took too much energy, so exhausted from dealing with customers, he spent the day in the silence of the forest of dreams. In the evening, he made a fire and sat comfortably, surrounded by his favorite books, enjoying the last hours of his stay. But there was one minor detail he had completely forgotten about. As if cursed all his life, someone was always following him. No matter where Yugji went, he was never able to be truly alone. Even now, while doing his business, a small snow-white cat with gray spots looking a bit like a snow leopard cub suddenly came to him. After watching the beautiful sunset shimmer on the waves of the raging sea, darkness fell. Being a thoughtful person, Yugji had built a small fire beforehand. Its warm orange light illuminated the stone cave, creating the perfect light for reading books. It was extremely peaceful in this small shelter. The quiet crackling of the wood and the chirping of crickets created a cozy atmosphere to fully experience the story being read. Once upon a time, no one had a problem listening to the sounds of the sea, but now it was occupied by monsters. Therefore, our hero was extremely lucky to enjoy the sound of the waves. If only he had the chance to bring Sanyo Hien or Sanuna here, he would do so without delay. Thoughts of his friends were like a warm blanket, comforting his mind and distracting him from the struggles of daily life. However, the memories of them faded away when strange sounds began to echo from the other end of the cave. After listening carefully, Yugji realized they sounded like a cat meowing. But what was it doing here? Taking a small log from the fire, he made a torch that lit the way well enough, getting closer and closer to the source of the sound. The protagonist realized that the meow was different from the usual voice of a cat. Could it be a lion or a tiger? Coming out of the other end of the cave, he leaned toward the humming bell that grew quietly in this forest. The plant was quite silent and did not make a single sound, which meant that the beast roaming nearby was not dangerous. However, the pterodon suddenly flying over his head still startled Yugji, and he rushed into the thick of the forest. As he ran after the pterodon, he began to hear the sounds of the animal's cries more and more clearly. As expected, the pterodon led him straight to a white cat with black flecks in its fur. The system quickly identified the animal as Actus, but it was obvious from looking at it that it was larger than a normal cat. It was not in the best shape, lying on the ground, shivering and moaning helplessly. Yugji took him into his arms, thinking he could help him by giving him a potion. At the same moment, the pterodon began to poke our hero with its claw, trying to draw his attention. Turning around at its call, Yugji started to apologize for being distracted and forgetting about him, but what he saw next touched his soul. Several pterodons had brought him fish. They had caught unbeknownst to him and were dragging them with their own 2 feet from the sea itself. Our hero was amazed at their care for the cat, so he praised them for their hard work in helping the forest dweller. Pride overflowed his heart. As a thank you, he scratched one of the creatures on the head and promised to bring more delicious food next time. Just like that, the cat found himself in Yuji's arms, with a delicious meal and a vial of the promised potion. After eating heartily, the protagonist was able to breathe a sigh of relief. It wasn't clear how the animal would respond to the potion, but it was worth a try. Not long ago, Actus had been shivering like an autumn leaf in the wind, but judging by how soundly he was sleeping now, it seemed that everything was fine. However, a funny thought struck Yugji at one point. Although he had not yet had the opportunity to fully explore the forest of dreams, this was the first time he had met an animal here. Stroking the soft fur of the cat, he became increasingly curious about where this little friend had come from. But at that very moment when his hand reached Actus's head, the cat suddenly opened his blue eyes and stared at him. Of course, our hero had not meant to wake him up. He was only stroking his fur out of habit. Thinking the animal might get angry, he instantly removed his hand and began to apologize. But as it turned out, Actus had woken up for a completely different reason, surprising Yugji in the process. Like a little kitten, the beast began to purr and paw at his hand, twisting his flexible body in different directions. He immediately began to be stroked and cuddled even more, with this behavior suggesting that he had chosen the protagonist as his companion. After calming down a bit, Yugji began to ponder over the animal's name. Although even the name sounded acceptable, it was just the species designation. Deciding that the animal's coloring was similar to that of a white tiger, he decided to name him Bam. Looking at Actus, our hero offered him to stay with him, of course, on the condition that he had nowhere else to go. After that, the beast meowed softly, and this sound was taken as agreement. After sitting in the Forest of Dreams for a few more hours, Yugji slowly packed his things and began to return home. There he set up a separate corner for sleeping and eating, and carried Bam himself to the store. There too, the poor beast could not stay quiet for a moment. Most of the women, as soon as they saw him, would squeal at the cuteness of the store's new resident. Lying in Yuji's arms, he seemed like an artificial doll with his eyes glistening from the light of the lamps. At some point, more and more people came wanting to see Bam, which brought the store a huge income. Many people assumed that he belonged to the snow leopard family, but that was fundamentally wrong. Our hero had found him in the dungeon and taken him in because he had nowhere else to go. Looking at the yawning animal, a wave of delight spread throughout the building, and then he was finally introduced as Bam. One of the customers naturally wanted to pet the cat's shining fur, so she thoughtfully asked for permission. However, Bam himself was against touching other people's dirty hands. As soon as the stranger's palm approached him, he immediately struck it with his claws. Yugji became very nervous when the customer's hand turned red from the scratch, causing him to ask how her hand was. Luckily, she was fine, unlike her broken heart. Naturally, the protagonist tried his best to smooth things over and apologized for the little incident, explaining that Bam was just shy. Stroking the animal on the head, he asked him not to lash out at people anymore. Meanwhile, in his head, Yugji replayed Bam's behavior. As it turned out, Bam was kind only to him. To everyone else, he acted coldly. If he continued to treat people like that, keeping him in the store would not be a good idea. However, even so, he couldn't leave him at home so easily. Besides, Yugji still wanted to show off the cuteness of his new friend. After this incident, most of the customers took their orders and left. Instead, Ko-Ah-Hyun came to him, holding a coffee stand in her hand. She had business to attend to, so she stopped by the store, grabbing some coffee on the way, assuming he liked it. After a brief greeting, she noticed the quiet sound of a cat that had folded its paws under itself and was sitting on the counter. She instantly grabbed a coat rack standing in the corner and began to cover herself with it, asking what kind of animal was sitting next to him. The protagonist calmly called its name and introduced it as a small tiger, while she trembled behind the wooden stand, moving further away toward the exit. As it turned out, she was scared shitless of cats. Mustering up her courage, Hide-and-Seek carefully walked over to the counter and handed the coffee to Yugji, who hadn't even hoped for this little gift. However, in the very next second, she jumped back, asking the animal that had gotten up from its seat to stay away from her. But there was nowhere to go. Bam was now living with him, and she would be coming to the potion shop every day. No one had any idea that she was afraid of the cat, which caused Yugji to ask the dwarf cat to come down to the floor instead. Bam, however, sat back down in his seat, starting to purr so loudly that he could be heard in the other room. As it turned out, the little one wanted Ko-Oh-Hyun to pet him, but this behavior of his was particularly strange. Previously, he had been unwilling to let other people's hands touch his fur, but now he was willing to voluntarily rush toward her. Hearing this, she walked over to the counter and, gingerly reaching out, brought her palm closer and closer, until she touched Bam. His fur was very soft, and the vibrating sound of his purring made it feel like a light massage on her fingertips. Still, this tiger was one of the gentlest animals Hide-and-Seek had ever met. The name Tiger was the only thing fierce about him. In truth, he turned out to be an even affectionate beast. Playing with the cat had knocked out all the thoughts with which she had come to the store. And for a moment she forgot the reason for her visit. She had actually come to warn Yugji that Hardnet was getting more and more violent because it was giving away free reinforcement scrolls. However, this was no longer news. Shrugging his shoulders, Yugji replied that even so, the leader of Eternal Flame had already come yesterday. He had given Chaohuayan a scroll that was worth at least a few million, suggesting that he was either not an ambitious person or simply a fool. However, Ko Hien was sure he was just the kind of person who didn't calculate everything and wasn't greedy, an ordinary salesman who did good to the people around him. Perhaps that's what attracts people to him, and that's the reason why she had started coming to his store so often even just to watch. He begged Bam to stop chewing and stretching his shirt and told her that he had no evil intentions, except that this idle chatter was interrupted by the fiercely loud ringing of a humming bell that grew behind the counter of the store. Such trembling of the plant could only mean one thing. It was here as a warning of danger that could threaten his life. After that, all the loudspeakers began to announce the occurrence of a Type 4 disaster, asking all residents living nearby to urgently evacuate the area. Unfortunately, this was not a drill. Hidensi shouted for Yugji to leave the store immediately. In the haste and utter confusion, our hero had to leave the building, running away with his so-called kitty in his arms. The hunters had arrived, and the armed forces were coordinating with them to lead the people and guide them to the evacuation sites. Young, old, men, women, and children. Anyone who could be affected by the upcoming disaster was being quickly transported to a safer place. That included Yugji and Little Bam. If it's a Type 4 warning, they must be facing the catastrophe of a Category 4 dungeon. If that's the case, there will be quite a lot of strong hunters in the area. Yugji could only hope that they would be enough to stop the incoming danger. Bam sensed that something was wrong and was feeling anxious in the middle of the crowded evacuation area. While Yugji tried to comfort the little guy as much as he could, everything was going smoothly until the ground started shaking wildly. Everyone in the designated area felt the quake, and chaos and fear immediately took hold of the crowd. When the shaking subsided, Yugji asked himself if it was still too early to feel reassured. Bam was visibly upset by all the strange things happening, and the little feline's teary eyes were far too cute to ignore. Yugji was moving like a real cat dad, trying his best to comfort his little friend. He continued to reassure himself that the ground shake was probably nothing and that they would be fine. In this world, a catastrophe is not your run-of-the-mill disaster. It occurs when a crisis arises, and hunters entering a dungeon fail to complete their quest. There won't be any major problems with catastrophes from low-difficulty dungeons. Those are easy to contain and deal with. But there are rare cases like this one that go down a lot differently. It happens when a rank 4 or higher dungeon suffers a catastrophe. In the event of such a failure, all civilians within a 20-kilometer radius of the gate are evacuated. Every armed force that can spare manpower carries out military operations while deploying their finest armored units, and of course high-ranking hunters are mobilized, as they are the most well-informed and well-equipped when it comes to matters concerning dungeons. The Sword Witch, Ao Hien, and everyone else are on standby, as everyone simultaneously feels the descent of ungodly forces. The dungeon gate, which looks like a dimensional rift, slowly starts cracking and growing more unstable by the second. Finally, the first wave of monsters breaks free to wreak havoc and spread destruction. The catastrophe has broken through into the human world. This time, it seems the enemies are skeleton warriors brought back from the dead. Humanity's first line of defense opens fire with heavy artillery from the military forces. Every soldier who can hold a gun, it's automatic, semi-automatic, anything that fires and fires a lot, rains down lead on the monsters trying to encroach on the human world. Next come the targeted airstrikes being dropped from up in the sky. Fighter jets and their highly trained pilots rain down explosives to pinpoint and wipe out the incoming horde of skeletons in an open area. These skeleton monsters are also known as liches. If these are the type of monsters that triggered the catastrophe, then the undead dungeon attack must have failed. Goro Group's successor, Kim Hung-suk, remains confident that even against these liches, their firepower would be enough to end it soon. He is already thinking of how to get away right after finishing off the remnants. He turns to one of the commanding military officers and suggests a focused fire on the gate itself. The hunters will deal with the monsters that slip through the cracks and the curse-using liches. Kim Hung-suk is quite certain that this operation is a lock for success, but that would only be the case if there's no other variable in the mix. Looking at the gate and the gigantic, grotesque creature emerging from it with its red eyes and disgusting mouth, it is starting to look like the worst is yet to come. Hung Suk identifies the creature coming out of the gate as a monstrous being. He immediately alerts all forces to raise the urgency and focus their entire firepower on the bastard that has just emerged from the fractured dungeon gate. Next comes the green light for open fire, an all-out attack that will pour out everything human technology is capable of, given the circumstance. A hellfire of explosives coming from both the skies and the ground rains down on the monstrous being, but it's looking like it is not faltering in its advance at all. It even taunts the military forces by catching one of the missiles right out of the air and putting the damn thing in its mouth. The booming sound and scorched earth explosion that result from the combined assault of everything the military has are destructive to the highest degree. The foot soldiers see this and start celebrating their supposed successful defense against the monstrous being. It looks like their focused firepower was quite effective at first glance. But Kim Hung-sik knows better. A monstrous being is a disaster-ranked creature. This much attack, no matter how impressive or destructive, isn't even enough to leave a scratch on it. As the smoke, dust, and debris settle, what emerges is the unscathed, hideous giant, with a permanent mocking smile on its ugly face. It is capable of almost human thought, and in its demented head it just keeps repeating, "There are enemies, dangerous enemies, and when there are dangerous enemies, it must kill." The monstrous being literally tanks every explosive and high-caliber bullet thrown at it. And now it is ready to take the initiative for its own attack. Kim Hung-suk notices that the monster is angling their way, and orders the armed forces to dodge the incoming charge. Everyone has not gotten out of the way yet, but it seems like that won't be a problem. The massive undead monster just passes them by without attacking at all. That bastard's goal is not the attacking military units on the front lines. It's so much worse than that. It's the spherical evacuation center at the heart of the city. The monstrous being is blowing past every single enemy in sight and is only focused on the area where most of the people in the city have gathered. In this fast-paced battle, the high-ranking hunters have not yet gotten the chance to show what they're capable of. They refuse to let this ugly bastard rush into the evacuation shelter without a fight. The attacking effort is being led by the Sword Witch herself. She comes from a high angle, with her magical blades lined up for a sharp attack. She then executes her special move, the technique that once ripped a man-stalker into shreds, her powerful rampage. The assault of the high-ranking hunters is not done yet. Eternal Flame Guild Master Chet Huayan also wants a piece of the kill. She orders everyone to stand back while she fires off one of her specialties. Using her runic wand enhanced by the scroll that Jia made, she fires off a scorching fireball that is more destructive than any man-made bomb. After that brutal assault of special moves, the monstrous being feels no pain at all. It still remains unscathed. As if to rub salt in the wounded egos of the guild leader and the Sword Witch, the monster doesn't even bother turning back to face them, as if they didn't even register on the creature's radar. At last, the monstrous being comes close enough to the evacuation shelter to lift its fist and gather whatever mysterious energy makes the undead so strong. In one punch, it tears a massive hole through the most secure and reinforced building in the city. This sphere was supposed to be a haven where people could expect to be safe from anything. The Sword Witch immediately rushes back into the action, even though Cher Huayan warned her that getting close to the monster would be dangerous. She just can't stand around and watch as people inside the shelter die. She is in there. The monstrous being rears its ugly mug and grotesque undead body in the hole it made, while the thought of finally finding the enemy continuously repeats inside its thick head. Who would have thought that the monster ignored all the attacks and all the forces outside to look for Yugji and Ben? Now that the shelter has been breached, it is safe to say that the situation outside is not looking good. Jia knows that the reasonable thing to do is to run away, but fear has trapped his legs in place. They won't move at all. He begs and begs for his trembling legs to move, to no avail. After a while, his lower body finally gains enough strength to take a step back, but it might just be too late. The monstrous being had already reached out its hand to pick him up. In its mind, it was starting to feel confused, as this man in front of it was not the strong enemy it had set out to look for. Bam looked as though he was just an anxious and adorable house cat earlier, but the little guy was now breathing intensely with not a hint of fear in those beady eyes. The little feline launched an attack of concentrated force right into the monster's palm, which had so badly wanted to grab them in a tight grip. Bam had stopped the immediate danger, and he wasn't stopping now. The actress jumped out of Jia's embrace and faced the monstrous being directly. Bam then started talking to the monstrous being telepathically, calling it a lowly demonic being. After hearing that domineering voice inside its head, the monster that had rendered every human force useless lost its grotesque smile and started sweating nervously. Bam continued to speak directly into the undead's mind while roaring with all his might. For a brief moment, the form of a fully grown actus appeared like a terrifyingly ferocious mirage. It invoked primal fear inside the monstrous being's mind, causing it to stop moving altogether. Outside, the sword witch also felt that an enormous amount of ether had just been unleashed from within the shelter. Whatever it was, it had given the high-ranking hunters another chance. When the monstrous being stood frozen in place, Eternal Flame Guild leader Sha Huayan already knew what the sword witch needed before she even asked. Huayan fired a nourishing flame directly onto the sword witch's blade. It looked as though her weapon had absorbed the guild leader's destructive potential. With that boost in strength and fire attribute, Ku He Hien and Sha Huayan's combo attack raged on. As the fire sword rampaged, this time the monster could not just ignore the pain or remain unscathed. The combined force of two rankers was impossible to contend with, especially while under the primal fear of Bam's corporeal mirage. That single series of attacks nearly drained everything the sword witch had left in her gas tank. When Huayun stepped forward to confirm whether the mission was over, Hien replied that they could not let their guard down yet, especially not against whatever it was that released such an enormous amount of ether inside the evacuation shelter. Upon entering through the massive opening that the monster had made, the only ones the hunters saw were Jia and Bam. It was just the gentle store manager and his adorable pet who had secretly dominated a disaster-level threat with no problems. The monster was defeated. The monster was defeated. Watching the others deal with the aftermath of the attack, and reflecting on what she had felt at the time, Jia finally returned home. After taking a shower, he could finally relax with a sigh of relief. He noted that today had been a really crazy day. Fortunately, however, everything had turned out all right. As soon as he sat down in his chair, Bam immediately jumped into his lap. He started rubbing against him, begging to be petted. Unable to resist the temptation, our hero began to caress him. He praised Bam for a job well done. It was only because of him that he was alive now. Jia also noted that when they had encountered the monster, his pet had seemed very angry. However, there was no trace of that anger now. While our hero was thinking about the monster, an interesting thought suddenly popped into his head, one that he immediately decided to write down in an endless book of spells. While our hero was writing something in the book on someone else's laptop screen, information appeared about the recently defeated monster that had emerged from the level 4 gate and nearly destroyed the hideout. That laptop belonged to none other than the heir of the Guru group, Kim Honu. Seeing the information that appeared on the website, he was very surprised. The website stated that the newly appeared monster was 15 meters tall and extremely ugly, but that it possessed tremendous strength. But that wasn't what surprised Kim Honu. In fact, he couldn't believe that the information on the website had been updated at the exact same time our hero had finished writing and closed the book. Humming a cheerful tune, our hero said that what he had written should have been enough. Lastly, he wondered if this was the kind of site where no one could edit anything at all. After a while, the three largest hunter guilds met to discuss the recent incident. They all knew that the monster had been killed by the airwave, but it wasn't their hunters who had done it. However, if the ether blast had not gone off, there was no telling if they would have been able to stop the monster in time. Everyone had just one question: who did it? Excitedly, they began to discuss and offer their theories. Some said it was a simple phenomenon. Others said that not everyone in the asylum had felt the etheric blast. Some suggested investigating the asylum to find the reason. After hearing all the speculations, Kim Hanu asked if they had seen the update on Mirror Wiki, Without waiting for an answer, he continued, saying that someone had the power not only to scare the monster, but also to update information on a site that no one was supposed to be able to edit. Hearing this, Kuhyun said that two assumptions could be made from it: either the person who chased away the monster was in the orphanage, or someone had a unique ability that was different from those of ordinary hunters. Manhwa Yan immediately intervened in the conversation. She said that the people who were in the shelter reported hearing a cat roar when the explosion occurred. Hearing this, Kim Henru said that he didn't think the information could help them directly. However, Hwa Yan went on to say that the strange shopkeeper was also there. Furthermore, he had a cat that it looked a lot like a snow leopard, from what they heard. Everyone present was shocked. After a while, Yu was standing behind his store as usual when he heard that someone had come. He greeted them with a smile as always. However, when he took a closer look, he realized that the visitors this time were not ordinary. After all, the three heads of the largest guilds were standing in front of him. Yu was a little frightened when he saw them walking toward him with determination, not understanding why three such important people had come to him at once. He worriedly asked what had happened. However, it was much simpler than he had imagined. All they wanted was to see his cat. Yu wondered if they had really come just to see Bam. He wanted to add that Bam would get scared and run away if they made so much noise, but at that moment a rustling sound was heard nearby, causing everyone to look in that direction. As it turned out, it was Bam who, to everyone's surprise, jumped onto the counter like an ordinary cat. He yawned sweetly and stretched. All three guild heads immediately rushed over to him, trying to see if he was the one who had caused the ether explosion. But Bam looked at the guests and meowed in bewilderment as if asking what they wanted from him. Manhwa Yan decided to take a closer look at the cat and picked him up. She wondered if he was really the one who had caused the airwave, because at first glance, he seemed to be an ordinary cat. Yu immediately panicked and told her to let him go as Bam didn't like being held like that. However, she didn't pay attention to his warnings. Turning to the others, she said she didn't feel the presence of ether in this one. She was sure that if that cat had been the culprit of the explosion, she would have certainly sensed it. Bam, who didn't particularly like sitting in a stranger's arms, tried to pull away. Realizing that the woman was not going to let him go, he immediately sank his sharp fangs into her hand, causing her to cry out in pain. Bam jumped out of her arms and leapt back onto the counter. Yu told the irritated Manhwa Yan to be careful, as Bam had a temper and could bite. At the same time, Manhwa Yan intervened. She said that she had heard he was at the orphanage during the incident with the monster. She added that someone reportedly heard a cat roar just before the monster escaped. Hearing this, Yu smiled awkwardly and replied that his cat might have actually gotten scared and started meowing loudly. Fixing his point, Kim Hyunwoo thoughtfully responded that that was indeed possible. Even though he agreed, he still had his doubts. However, when he saw the cat trying to jump on his master's head, he realized their suspicions were likely false. There was no way he could believe that the cat in front of him had the power to stop such a strong monster. But it didn't matter, because if he could, he would try to hire the store clerk right now. But this wasn't the right time. Even though Manhwa Yan had already been rejected once, it was clear that she wasn't going to give up. Kim Hyunwoo had no desire to compete with her. Deciding to put the idea off until a better time, he turned around and headed for the exit. He told Yu that he would see him again. Manhwa Yan immediately followed him, saying she wanted to see him get rejected too. Manhwa Yan, on the other hand, didn't stay long. Smiling brightly, she promised to come back again. Our hero didn't mind at all, and replied that she could come back anytime. That night, Yu lay on a lounge chair by the fire, reading a book. He came across some information about the Jenna continent. He had already heard about it somewhere, so he immediately started reading with interest. According to the information in the book, the Jenna continent was a place where many different people lived together with the Great Tree. The tree created nature gods to protect the continent. After reading this, Yu was very surprised. As he continued reading, he came across a description of one of the nature gods. It had white fur with dark spots and was known as the raging fangs of nature. Our hero was shocked by what he read. The description of the creature matched Bam's image exactly. Yu looked at his pet, who was sleeping peacefully on his lap, and wondered, Was Bam a nature god? The realization that this might be true made him jump up sharply. Even though this little cat didn't look like a nature god, the things that had happened around him lately hinted that it could very well be true. You realized that none of this could be a coincidence. The guild leaders had already mentioned that there had been a large etheric explosion in the asylum, and after comparing all the facts, our hero came to the conclusion that it was most likely the work of Bam's paw. Looking at the little kitten lying on his lap, you wondered if he could really consider him a nature god. After all, if that was true, then the tree from his dream could also be the very real-world tree. When he thought about it, he realized that it all really did make sense. You had a feeling from the beginning as if the tree had given him a job and that it all started the moment he received the worker class. Helping the Terradrones and saving Bam, it was like it was all part of some grand plan. While our hero was thinking about this, a light suddenly began to emanate from the book he had placed next to him. In the next instant, the book opened by itself and a bright light poured out of its pages. The unexpectedness of it surprised our hero very much. A system window popped up in front of him. The first thing that caught Yu's eye was that his class was called XXX Worker. He immediately wondered what that meant. However, the next moment, his thoughts were interrupted by a blinding light that made him cover his eyes with his hands. At the same time, Wang Soneng was sitting in a dark room, in the middle of a pile of books, wrapped in a blanket. She listened to the news. It said that there was still a group of undead led by a senior lich, near Jiri-san City. For 10 years now, the government had refused to make any attempt to confront them. However, the undead were spreading an infestation that was greatly reducing the area available for crops, which led to food shortages. The only way to solve this was to defeat the undead. Wang Sang turned off the TV without listening to the experts' opinions. She wrapped herself in a blanket and said thoughtfully that hunting the lich was not easy. We're going back to the Forest of Dreams. Yu opened his eyes and found himself standing in front of the world tree. He turned to it and said that it had been guiding him all along and it was it that had led him to the Forest of Dreams. Smiling, he added that he didn't know why it had given him such an important task. However, even so, he believed there must have been some reason for it. That was why he promised that he would do his best to help. Suddenly, a magical portal appeared behind him. Turning around, our hero looked at it with bewilderment, watching the portal with interest. Something was clearly going to appear. Seeing that it was purple in color, our hero immediately had a guess. The very next moment, a cold and gloomy voice was heard, the owner of which began to shout all sorts of terrifying curses. Looking at the place where the portal had recently been, Yu saw a skeleton with a staff in his hands, who continued to shout furiously. However, this wasn't just any skeleton, it was a true elder lich. In addition, he was not alone. He was in charge of a huge army of undead that obeyed his orders without question. According to the information he knew, the senior lich was considered a monster of terrible power. Even the strongest guilds wouldn't want to face him in his army. However, right now to Yu they seemed more cute than dangerous. Watching them like Gulliver watching the Lilliputians, he wondered what they were saying. Suddenly a system window appeared in front of our hero, informing him that the elder lich and his army were infecting the nearest lands, and that they would soon reach his land as well. Following that, the system asked if he wanted to know a few ways he could reduce the lich's influence. He agreed without a second thought. He was happily ready to fulfill his duty. The war lich, along with his army, continued to shout curses. All they wanted was death to all living things. Watching them, our hero noted that they were actually quite cute. Their attempts to appear scary and evil seemed very amusing to him. Yu realized that it would be easier for him to intervene using the ether. However, it would be even easier if he could just swat them away like he did with the ants. But he quickly realized that he couldn't do that, because this was a lich. Liches were known to be immortal until their life source was destroyed, so this time he would not be able to deal with him so easily. Fortunately, the system informed him that in order to reduce the influence of the lich, he had to first destroy its life source. After that, the only thing left to do was to clear out the surrounding areas. Looking more closely at the landscape, our hero could see a castle visible in the distance. Although only ruins remained of it, Yu could say with certainty that he had already seen it somewhere. The clue was in the flag hanging on the wall. Seeing it, our hero immediately remembered it was the flag of the kingdom of Estum, and since it was destroyed and the lich had a large army of undead, the conclusion was self-evident. The inhabitants of the kingdom of Estum could just be the undead ruled by the lich. However, it didn't matter now. There was nothing he could do to help them. All he had to concentrate on now was victory. There was no way he could let the infection spread any further. Even though he couldn't intervene directly, that wasn't a problem. After all, he still had his army of Torterra drones who followed his orders without question and were determined to win. But suddenly, there was a small problem. The system reported that a large rock was blocking the army's path, preventing it from moving forward. Even though the rock seemed tiny to him, it was a huge problem for the Torterra drones after all. Only one warrior among them could fly. Deciding that if he left it up to them it might take too long, Yu took action. In the next instant, under the admiring gazes of the Torterra drones, he had already thrown the rocks out of their way. As soon as the path was clear, they immediately rushed into battle. Their task was to find and destroy the Elder Lich's life source. But before they could do that, they needed to break through the undead army. In the next instant, the two armies clashed in a fierce battle, but it didn't last long. The Torterra drones didn't leave the undead a chance. They defeated the undead army almost instantly. Yule was delighted to see that they had become much stronger in the meantime and now looked more like a real army. Although the Torterra drones were doing well and had managed to kill a large number of undead, their advantage could disappear at any moment. After all, the lich still had a lot of undead he could summon. In the next moment, the Torterra drones faced undead reinforcements. However, that was not all. Raising his staff high, the Elder Lich began to cast some kind of terrifying spell. As he cast it, he instantly subjected the Torterra drones to a curse that caused them to begin to feel pain. Taking advantage of the fact that they were unable to fight, the Lich ordered his army to attack. However, he suddenly encountered a problem. It was the commander of the Torterra drone army, who for some reason was not affected by the curse. Judging from his evil gaze, he was determined. The negative effects didn't work because our hero had applied the worker's blessing, which did its job perfectly. In the next instant, the Lich's staff was in the air, left without his only weapon. He was cornered. He tried to resist and shouted curses, but it didn't help him. The Torterra drones quickly grabbed him by his limbs and pinned him to the ground. But that was not the end for the Lich, for he was immediately stripped of his limbs and then his entire body. He mockingly scoffed and called them idiots, saying there was no point in destroying him because he could be resurrected at any moment. However, in the next second, he realized that he was very much mistaken. After all, during the battle, the Torterra drone had managed to find his life source. Suddenly, a system notification appeared in front of Yu, informing him that in order to destroy the source, he needed to evolve his Torterra drone warrior. The cost of evolution, on the other hand, was 5 points of essence. Though it was expensive, our hero had no choice. As soon as he pressed the confirmation button, the Torterra drone leader transformed from an ordinary warrior into a knight. He immediately rushed toward the castle at full speed. Breaking through the wall, he entered the room where the chest containing the source of life stood. The Lich was desperately trying to recover because he realized that if he did nothing he would die, but he had no chance. In the next instant, the Torterra drone knight destroyed the chest where the Lich's life source was stored. The Elder Lich immediately howled in pain. This was the end of him. With painful screams, he and his army immediately began to disappear. Yu watched with a happy smile as his enemies dissolved into thin air. All he could say at that moment was that they had managed to win. But that wasn't all. In addition to the victory, they had obtained a lot of valuable trophies that the Torterra drones brought to our hero. Seeing this, he immediately praised and thanked them. His praise caused embarrassment among most of the army, but the surprises did not end there. Suddenly, the Torterra drone knight brought him a large chest, which in the next moment became even bigger. Looking inside, Yu was pleasantly surprised at what he saw. Inside was a blade that seemed very valuable at first glance. The description said it was called the Royal Seal of the Estum Kingdom. It had a unique class and added 5 points to mental health, as well as a trait called Conqueror's Charisma. After reading this, our hero was convinced that it belonged to Estum Mountain, as he had assumed. His first thought was to find the owner of the sword. However, after a little thought, he realized that most likely the owner had long since died. So Yu put the blade in his backpack and said that he would take care of it later. After all, right now he still had to fulfill the second condition to reduce the status of the lich's influence, that was to clean up the infected land. Together with an army of Turtara drones, he immediately began to pour the tainted earth into a basin. As he brought it back to his forest, he was delighted to note that it had cleansed just as he had intended. Suddenly, a Turtara drone knight flew up to him, holding ink in his paws. Yu was a little surprised and asked if he wanted him to write the scroll. He wanted to reply that he couldn't write it without the runes, but the runes that appeared on the tree in time left him no choice. After a while, he was already sitting and writing a scroll of purification. It was supposed to restore the infected land to its original state, but even though he had made the scroll, he still had questions about how to use it. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by Bam jumping on top of him. The pet was trying to show him that he wanted his attention. While our hero was babysitting Bam and telling him to be careful as the infection could harm him, the Tartara drone knight decided to take matters into his own hands. He immediately tore out the page with the inscriptions. After a while, our hero finally finished playing with Bam. Surprised that it was very quiet, he looked around. Not seeing any Turtle drone, he wondered where they had gone. Somewhere in the mountains, terrifying curses began to be heard again. Some lich had once again raised an army of undead from their graves and begun to create havoc. The people at the mountain temple could not understand what was going on or why they were hearing strange voices. However, they soon realized that they had encountered nothing less than a monster of monstrous level surrounded by an army of undead. Another elder lich had begun to infect and destroy everything in its path. He would have continued to wreak havoc had it not been for the portal that suddenly appeared behind him. In the next instant, the lich was confronted by a truly terrifying foe. A Turtara drone knight stood before him at full height. He was not only huge in size but also very angry. Realizing that there would be no negotiation, the lich immediately ordered his warriors to attack and destroy this cursed race of the World Tree, stop them at all costs. But it didn't work out so well. After all, it only took one blow to destroy half of his army. The lich was no easy task. While the enemy was distracted by his warriors, he managed to cast a spell. In the very next moment, a curse fell on the Turtara drone. However, as it turned out, it was of no use. The Turtara drone looked at the lich with a mocking gaze, as if to say that techniques of that level did not work on him. The lich was scared to death and shocked. He didn't understand why his curse had no effect, but he had no time to wonder or figure it out because he had bigger problems to deal with. Namely, the huge army of Turtara drones that had suddenly appeared from the portal and which was clearly determined to turn him and his army into. Around this time, Yu was standing behind the counter of his store as usual. As long as there were no visitors, he could afford to fondle Bam. However, their pastime was disturbed by a visitor who entered the store. It was Huang Sunang, who hurried toward him. After approaching the counter and grabbing the remote, she immediately turned on the TV. At once, the voice of the anchor came on and announced that they had breaking news. The reporter who had arrived at the scene excitedly reported that there were signs of battle in the areas where the lich had been. In addition, the infested lands had been cleared. Officials also commented on this, saying that it could only mean all the liches had been destroyed. Listening to the news, Yu couldn't help but wonder what had happened. However, the very next moment, he received the answer to his question. The reporter said that they had managed to capture a previously unknown task creature at the scene. According to the experts, it could have been disaster level or even destruction level. However, no more information could be obtained as the creature disappeared as quickly as it appeared. After watching the news, Yu immediately wondered what his Turtara drones were doing there. At the same time, Kim Hook, who had also watched the news, noted that the unknown creature was not of destruction level. Ko Oh Hien, on the other hand, concluded that it was a mythical level monster, while Cha Ha Ha Hien was only puzzled as to what was even going on. At about the same time, a dark and frightening shadow loomed over the small and nervous Pterodon. However, it only seemed that way, for Yu was not really angry at them for their willfulness. Turning to the pterodon, our hero said that they should talk it over. Leaving their leader to fend for himself, the rest of the pterodrones immediately ran away. Yu wasn't going to scold them and told them not to be afraid because they hadn't done anything wrong. However, he still had questions about whether they were the ones who had ripped out the scroll and appeared in Jurisan, destroying all the liches. Without answering, the pterodon knight ran off somewhere. However, a moment later, he came back but not empty-handed. In front of Yu appeared a large pile of ether stones and essence, which sparkled brightly in the sun. However, our hero didn't need a bribe. All he wanted to know was whether they were the ones who had appeared in the city. Still feeling guilty for what he had done, the pterodon knight nodded in response. He expected punishment but there was none. Gently stroking him, Yu said that he wasn't trying to intimidate them, but just wanted to confirm and make sure that they really did it. Without stopping the stroking, our hero said with a bright smile that they had done an excellent job of cleansing Jurisan. The misunderstanding had been cleared up, but the pile of ether stones and essences remained. Looking at them, Yu couldn't help but wonder what he was supposed to do with them. As if nothing had happened, he picked up a stone that was worth millions of dollars and noted that they had received it for defeating the elder lich. Bam, who hadn't shown any signs of interest before, suddenly meowed and reached for the stone. Yu saw this and asked if he wanted to play with it. Handing him the stone, which I will remind cost millions of dollars, our hero said he could take it. However, as it turned out, Bam was not going to play with the crystal. Having received what he wanted, Bam immediately began to chew on it. Watching him happily eat the stone, Yu wondered if this was the source of their energy. He immediately thought that perhaps that was why the pterodrones had taken the stones and brought them to him. After Bam finished eating, he meowed contentedly. Now our hero was finally convinced that he was a nature god, as their behavior was beyond common sense. However, he didn't dwell on it, as he still had 15 essence stones that he was going to spend on improving his characteristics. The first thing he decided to improve was his strength and stamina. As he used the stones, he felt a warm energy begin to spread through his body. Deciding to see if anything had changed, he waved his hand. The main reason he decided to improve his strength was because he was a worker. Stroking Bam, Yu told himself that he shouldn't be obsessed with getting stronger. He should just be happy with what he already had. After all, it was enough for him. Chasing power would not bring him joy. After a while, our hero received a call from the Hunter Control Center. They reported that they needed a dungeon latecomer immediately. He agreed without a second thought. He was very excited and enthusiastic, as he had never been to a real dungeon latecomer party before. Yu soon arrived at the place where the other participants were gathering. Since quite a few people were present, he figured the dungeon had to be huge. Suddenly a man called out to him. He greeted our hero and said that they hadn't seen each other for quite some time. Yu immediately recognized the man. It was his old acquaintance, Mr. Wanho. The man couldn't contain his excitement, as this was the first time he had attended the opening of a dungeon of this level. Yu also said that he had never seen so many people at a latecomer party before. Putting his arm around our hero's shoulders, Mr. Wanho said that this time, they might even be able to find something good. To this, Yu replied that he didn't think they would ever get such a chance again. However, the man still believed in the best. While he was saying something else caught our hero's attention. The sound of someone's heels clacking was heard nearby. The owner was Ku Hien, who had just returned from the dungeon, immediately attracted the gazes of everyone present. She was beautiful enough that, when she appeared, everyone started talking about her. While someone was saying that they had heard she had once again completed the quest alone. Ku Hien suddenly noticed Yu. She immediately headed toward him. Not understanding what was going on, he stared at her in bewilderment. After greeting our hero, she asked if he had come here to enter with the other latecomers. He nodded affirmatively, adding that he had gotten a call saying they were short on people. While they were talking, the others present watched in amazement. There was no way they expected her to talk to some guy first. Hearing this, Ku immediately had a thought in her head. It could be dangerous out there. She herself didn't know why she suddenly felt the urge to suggest it. With an awkward smile, she asked if he would be sorry if she went along with him. She immediately added that if he went to the dungeon with her, he would be able to move around freely and not worry about anything. Yu didn't mind such company, but he was a little embarrassed that they were now the focus of everyone's attention. Once the others saw that Ku Hien was talking to some ordinary guy, they too decided to try their luck. As they approached her, they started offering to go with her. Someone even offered her all the authority regarding the dungeon. Everyone was so focused on gaining her favor that they didn't pay any attention to our hero, who just stood there silently. But Ku wasn't going to accept anyone's offer. She didn't need anyone's help either. All their attempts to interest her were in vain. She was only interested in one person here. Yu. Ignoring the others, she smilingly told Yu to follow her, to which he nodded, a little confused. Yu and Ko Hien were walking through a dungeon that looked very much like a forest. Turning to our hero, Ku said that she had heard rare plants could be found in such dungeons, to which he replied that many people actually passed by without knowing about them, since they could hardly find anything worthwhile on the surface. She suggested going deeper. Yu was completely fine with that, but something in his backpack suddenly started moving. As it turned out, it was Bam, who was finding it hard to sit still in the stuffy backpack. As soon as Kuri saw him, her eyes immediately lit up with the desire to pet the beautiful creature. Calling it very cute, she reached out to pet him. However, she was immediately rejected. While the girl was saddened by her failure, Yu explained that Bam didn't like being held by his front paws. Kru pouted a little and noted that he was really cranky. Bam, who didn't want to sit in the backpack anymore, immediately started trying to break free. The green grass and fresh air beckoned to him. Finally, having freed himself, he jumped to the ground. Squatting down and watching the cat with interest, Ku noticed that he had gotten a little bigger since the last time she had seen him. Petting Bam, Yu replied that it was because of the rather expensive food he was feeding him. After thinking for a bit, he decided it would be best not to tell her that the last time, Bam had eaten a stone worth about 1 billion won. Since everyone was ready, Ku Hien suggested that they move out immediately. After all, their adventure was just beginning. As they continued their journey through the forest, the girl asked Yu if he had seen the news yesterday. He asked what kind of news she was talking about. Ku Hien replied that it was about a mythical level monster called the pterodon. Her words made our hero a little nervous, but he managed to hold back his emotions and pretend that nothing had happened. Ku continued, saying that she had even heard the government had managed to find traces of giants in the Busan Ant dungeon. Listening to the girl's words, Yu thought that the Devil Ant dungeon sounded very familiar. After thinking for a bit, he was able to remember his attempts to cosplay as Aaron. As Ku Hien continued to talk about how that dungeon had been closed because of its danger, Yu chuckled nervously in his head because he was the giant. Although he was surprised to hear this, he had already guessed that his miniature world was connected to the dungeons of the real world. Suddenly, Yu had to interrupt his thoughts as Bam, who was walking ahead of everyone, stopped abruptly and adopted a fighting stance. Not understanding what caused this behavior, our hero asked what had happened. In the next instant, Ku grabbed her sword. Turning to Yu, she told him in a grim voice to go back immediately. Taking out her sword, she stood in front of their small group. A cold breeze blew in their direction, which did not bode well. And so it was, for in the next moment, Yu was seized by a horrible but painfully familiar sensation. Just as before, the monsters that appeared in front of them were animated trees. Even though they were quite a distance away, their lust for killing and madness could still be felt very clearly. Turning his gaze to the girl, Yu noticed the sword in her hands begin to tremble. He immediately asked if she was all right. Ku wasn't fine. She knew she had to do something, but her body froze in place and refused to listen to her. In a trembling voice, she said that this was the same place where Sang-hook had disappeared. Yu had already heard that Han Sang-hook, a hunter of the first rank, had disappeared in one of the dungeons. If this was the same dungeon, then the rank of this place had to be at least rank 5. Pulling their roots out of the ground, the monsters began to advance. The next moment, the sound of a potion bottle being opened was heard. After controlling her fear and coming to her senses, Ku drank the potion. After that, she resolutely stood up and told our hero to run to the entrance of the dungeon with Bam. She was determined to clean up the place. You could see her determination, however. The problem was that even she wouldn't be able to deal with so many high-rank monsters. But as it turned out, the mood to fight wasn't just Sio's. Bam, exuding a blue aura, also resolutely stared at the monsters. In the next instant, he rushed straight towards them without paying any attention to the shouts of the protagonist who tried to stop him. However, what happened next shocked everyone very much. Just like last time, the monsters who saw Bam also started to run away. One of the tree monsters didn't manage to do so because the cat caught up with it very quickly. Grabbing one of the monster's limbs, Bam was able to tear it off without much effort. The monster lost its arm and howled in pain. The fingers of the severed limb had some seeds on them, which came off with it. Since Bam only stopped at the monster's arm and didn't pursue it, the monster immediately ran away while screaming. Yu and Ku were watching with their mouths wide open the whole time. The cat came back to them as if nothing had happened. Yu saw that the cat was carrying something in its mouth and leaned towards it. Holding a seed in his mouth, Bam looked at our hero with shining eyes, as if trying to say that he had brought it for him. Guessing this, our hero took the seed. Turning to the cat, he asked if the cat wanted him to plant it. Bam nodded affirmatively. Ku was watching the monsters run away. She had never seen a monster of such a high level run away from someone in fear. Taking Bam in his arms, Yu turned to her and said that they had more important problems right now, namely the deeper places in the dungeon that smelled of danger. After all, the monsters they had just encountered were only a small part of the dangers that could be waiting for them. Sakuryon understood this very well. She didn't want to involve her companions in all this, so she again told our hero to go back with Bam. Yu looked at the girl with a puzzled look and asked about her plans. Tears appeared in Ku's eyes. With desperation in her voice, she replied that she couldn't just leave like that because she had already managed to find a small clue. So she decided that no matter what, she would continue her search. Yu was really surprised by the girl's determination. Although he had no desire to be in danger, he wasn't going to leave her behind. Holding out a potion to Sakuri, he said that he would go along with her. The girl did not immediately believe what she heard and looked at Yu in bewilderment. Our hero with a smile added that he understood the danger but believed that she could protect them. Taking the potion, Ku replied that she would do her best to make sure they could return home. During their journey, evening had come. However, they had no intention of stopping. They continued to travel further and further. At one point, Ku suddenly stopped, pointing at something ahead of them. She asked if he saw the same thing she did. Looking closer, our hero saw a cave that seemed to have a light coming from it. They didn't know what was waiting for them, but they could only hope that the answer they needed was inside the cave. The best and only way to find out what was in the cave was to go and check it out. So after a while, our hero stood at the entrance. After shining the torch inside, Yu noted that there was no contamination inside the cave. Once inside, they began to look around carefully. Suddenly, Ku excitedly told our hero to look forward. As he got closer, he saw a distinct trail of blood that stretched inside. Realizing that this could be the clue they were looking for, Yu immediately said firmly that they should keep moving cautiously. Moving through the cave, our heroes tried to find any clues. Luckily, after a while, Ku shouted excitedly and stared at something ahead of them. On the ground lay someone's broken sword as well as very shabby armor. From their condition, it was safe to say that their owner had had a hard time. The girl immediately recognized these things. She fell to her knees in despair, hugging the armor. The girl began to cry. Our hero immediately tried to calm her down, saying that there was still a chance that her Oa was alive. Taking her by the shoulders, he said that since the marks were only at the entrance, could it mean that he was able to heal and leave? Hearing this, she tearfully asked if it could really be so, to which our hero nodded affirmatively. Suddenly Bam approached them and tried to get their attention. Seeing this, Yu was surprised and asked what he was doing. However, as it turned out, he wasn't trying to play as he normally would. In his mouth was some kind of green ball that shone with a bright light. As soon as the ball was in the hands of our hero, the system reported that it was a symbiote egg. Looking at the egg thoughtfully, Yu thought that he had already heard about it somewhere, so to be sure he decided to check the information once they got back. His thoughts were disturbed by Bam, who suddenly bit his hand. Looking at him, Yu immediately realized that he wanted to be praised. After petting him, our hero said that he had done a good job and had really done a good job. Petting the cat was a good thing, but they were in a dungeon where they shouldn't linger. Since they had found the footprints, they could be sure that not all was lost yet. After Yu's words, Ku had a glimmer of hope. Smiling happily, she said that she would definitely keep searching until she found him. Since they had managed to find clues and fulfill their original plan, she offered to go back. Standing at the exit of the dungeon, Ku sincerely thanked Yu for his help, to which he smiled awkwardly and replied that he had done almost nothing to receive praise. However, the girl didn't see it that way. Cradling the armor to herself, she replied that it was only because of him that they were able to find the traces of Suyapa. After that, smiling brightly, she stated that she was always lucky to be with him. Around him, hearing that, Yu was a little embarrassed. Bam, on the other hand, was watching the situation with contempt. Breaking the awkward silence, Ku said that he could ask her for help any time. Shaking her hand, Yu replied that he would definitely do so. Bam watched this with obvious displeasure. In the next moment, he tried to separate their hands. However, Ku's affection went to him as well. She stroked the cat and said that she was grateful for his help too. Since it was already late, Yu suggested that they split up right there. After all, he still had to give his pet a snack, but besides that, he had one more important thing to do, one that he absolutely had to do. After returning back to the store, Yu immediately started searching for information about the symbiote egg. Flipping through another book, he told himself that he was sure he had already read about it somewhere. Sitting on the pile of books, Bam watched his master, who had been staring at the pages for hours. He didn't really like it, as he was eager to play. Deciding to take matters into his own paws, he immediately jumped into the pile of books. Looking at the joyful Bam sitting in the pile of books, Yu laughed. Taking the book off his head, he said with a sigh that he didn't think he would find anything in this book, and so the only option was to try and find out about the egg in the dream world. So he waved goodbye to Bam and said that they would see each other there. In the next moment, he was already immersed in the dream world. Soon he found himself in his garden in the forest. As usual, he was very happy to experience the refreshing sensation of nature after so many hours of reading books. However, suddenly something surprised our hero very much. Puzzled, he looked at the tree and wondered if it had always been so big. However, the surprises did not end there. On the branches of the tree he found some fruit. According to the information the system provided, they were the fruits of the world tree. Yu was surprised. How could he not have thought that this was indeed a world tree? The very next moment, something caught his attention again. As it turned out, it was the Patra drones that greeted him cheerfully. While Bam started to try to use them as toys, Yu took out the egg from his bag, showing it to the Patra drone. He asked if they happened to know what it was. To his surprise, the Patra drone knight immediately nodded affirmatively, as if to say he knew what to do with it. Our hero was very happy about this because he had already tried everything to find out something. In the next moment, the system sent a notification that the Patra drone knight was offering to hatch the egg for him. Yu immediately agreed and gave it to him. After taking the egg, the Patra drone began dragging it somewhere. Yu now had one less thing to worry about. Seeing off the procession with a glance, our hero said with a smile that they could be relied on. At the same time, there was a dinner in the nest of the Patra drones. Sitting on her throne, the queen was eating the goodies brought to her by the workers. Suddenly, however, a knight appeared carrying the egg. He immediately handed it to the queen. Putting aside all her affairs, she clasped the egg with her paws while the workers immediately brought essence crystals. Placing the egg in the center, they surrounded it with the crystals while the queen embraced it and began to incubate it. While the paradrones were doing useful things, Yu was fooling around and babysitting Bam. Bam was only too happy to join him, which made him purr happily. Suddenly something interrupted their fun. Our heroes immediately stared at the tree, whose trunk was followed by a procession of paradrones moving in a chain like ants. They climbed to the top of the tree. However, as it turned out, they did not rise there for nothing. There was a majestic symbiote moth hovering in the air above. Seeing this, Yu immediately wondered if it was a symbol. In the next instant, the symbiote spread its wings and soared into the air. A golden glow began to emanate from it, and gradually surrounded the tree. In the next instant, a dazzling bright white light illuminated everything around it. Soon it disappeared, and everything seemed to return to its normal rhythm of life. However, something had changed. While our hero was admiring the tree, the system sent him a notification that a group of sleeping symbiotes had awakened. The symbiote disappeared above the tree with a golden flash, and in that golden glow a notice appeared in front of you. The world tree had been restored. Now as he approached the giant greenish tree, he touched it to feel its power. What a relief that the tree was now healthy and full of energy. To his surprise, it didn't end there. He felt a pleasant, light sensation, as if a warm summer breeze was blowing from all sides and trying to lift him up. Everything around him was drowned in rainbow light, and one notice appeared after another. The world tree bestows its blessing upon him. Now with the blessing of the tree, his dormant destiny had been awakened, and his class had once again changed. He was now the world tree's worker, filled with new power. Our hero decided to take a walk in the surrounding forest, where it was impossible not to notice the changes. The awakening of the world tree seemed to have affected the entire forest, which was now alive with new life and golden fruits everywhere. You couldn't contain his admiration as he looked at them. Now this world from his dreams had become even more fabulous. He couldn't stop exclaiming, "No way," as he strolled through the renewed forest, where life was booming and even Bam found something to do. The fish overflowed the local river and constantly jumped out of it, becoming easy prey for the cat. But it didn't end there. The forest became bigger and wider, which our hero couldn't be happier about. He did not understand how the trees had become so big in an instant, and the sun apples too. Up with the forest, the trees on which they grew raised their level, and now they were of the second level. Yugji's happiness was unbounded, as he could now make twice as many potions as before, thanks to this large number of high-level sun apples. For a moment he even thought that he could become rich by selling this mountain of potions to the hunters. However, it was only for a moment, and he dismissed the thought almost immediately, explaining to himself that money wasn't really his first priority. The far more important reason was to find out why the world tree had given him this chance. Perhaps it was because he had some hidden dormant destiny, one that relied on the world tree to bring the whole world back together. Maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't. But one thing he was sure of was that he would find out soon enough. He was brought out of his musings by Bam, who tried to get his attention by meowing loudly. You immediately realized what was going on. Cats only meowed so insistently when they were hungry. This misunderstanding had to be corrected immediately, so he opened his big backpack to get a suitable tool from there. Like a brave and stupid villain, he pulled out a fishing rod, deciding that today was a good day for fishing. Today, he expected to catch a red trout for lunch. Bam was thrilled with the idea, and kept trying to catch the trolling rod ahead of the trout. Yu started fishing, and like a professional fisherman, he waited patiently. Bam followed his example and also waited for the fish. Finally their labors paid off, and they hooked a big fish, which was still struggling to jump out of the water when Yu got it out. He and his cat were over the moon, rejoicing like little children. But in this forest of dreams, everything was unusual, and this fish was one of them. Holding it in his hands, he saw a notice above it. It was indeed a red trout, but that wasn't what was interesting. What caught his attention was that by eating it one could gain the extrasensory perception skill level 1 for 30 minutes. This skill increased all the senses and reflexes of the caster by 20% for 30 minutes, but in Yu's opinion the description of this item wasn't sufficient and didn't explain all the details of its effects. Suddenly he had an idea on how to fix this and use it to his advantage. So he left the red trout to his cat and decided to rummage through his backpack to confirm his hunches on other items as well. Taking out his dimensional pouch, he carefully read its description from the system, which said that he could store items in it without risk of damaging them. This effect also worked when he entered another dimension. But the other hunters didn't seem to have seen these system descriptions, and his idea was perfect to fix that. This way he wouldn't have to explain the effects of potions several times to the hunters, and it would save him a lot of time in the future. Yu was shining with happiness and enthusiasm. Joyful, he picked up Bam, who was still trying to enjoy the fish and wished to be left alone, but no one asked his opinion. Yo picked up the cat along with the fish in his teeth and dragged him back home. He couldn't wait to get back to the store and put his great idea into practice. He decided to use his perfect handwriting skill to write beautiful labels explaining the effects of his potions. In just a few days there was a huge crowd of customers outside his store, who couldn't wait to get in. It felt like Black Friday. Some of them didn't even understand how there could be so many people here. Had all the hunters in Seoul gathered here today? His partner assumed that a rank 1 dungeon or something like that had opened up here. But it wasn't like that. In the midst of the chaos around him, Bam's figure stood out. In his teeth he carried notes with numbers and handed them out to the people in line. Such service was to everyone's liking, and the hunters gratefully accepted the numbers from him. Seeing such a big queue, one ordinary passerby asked the one at the end of the line what they were all doing here. "What's the sale?" The hunter was surprised by his stupid question, and pointing his finger in the direction of the store, asked him a rhetorical question. "What do you think we're doing here?" "Of course we're waiting for a chance to buy potions," he continued, "and you're standing here even though you don't know if it's your turn or not." The ordinary passerby was confused and asked him what potions were. The hunter realized that he was just a civilian who didn't know anything at all. Yugji, meanwhile, was forced to put restrictions on sales, so that everyone could buy at least a little. One person was allowed to buy 3 bottles of potion, but before they could do so they had to get a ticket with a number in the queue from Bam. 2 potions were especially popular, a paralysis potion and a special health potion. The paralysis potion increased resistance to the effects of paralysis by 35% for 30 minutes, and the special health potion restored 22% of maximum health over 13 seconds. The hunter at the end of the line kept explaining that these potions were made by the owner of the store, tasted good, and had excellent effects. So even hunters from the nearby neighborhoods came to buy some. On top of that, the price of these potions was as nice as their taste. But Bam seemed to enjoy what he was doing and even almost tagged one guy in line as his territory, making him embarrassed and wondering why it had to happen right in front of him. Bam then returned to his master as if nothing had happened. Yu, who knew nothing about his antics, praised him for a job well done. His store was filled with customers every day, and Yugji was happy with how business was going. Even though all he could do was create good potions, it was enough to bring happiness to himself and those around him. He was determined to make full use of the abilities bestowed upon him by the World Tree and use them not for his own sake, but for everyone's sake. Now he looked forward to the future, hoping he could help. Many customers came to the counter one by one, but Yugji didn't seem tired at all as he did what he loved to do. He wished each of them a good day and took care of the task at hand. Time flew by until he was disturbed by his acquaintance, Hwang Sun-young, who awkwardly walked into the store as usual and greeted Yugji. Our hero immediately noticed her and greeted her cheerfully, even though he didn't expect to see her here. Wee was primarily interested in why there were so many people here. The reason for her visit was the news she had seen in their hunting community, and she decided to show Yugji right away. Everyone there was talking about some incredible store that was a sanctuary of rare yet affordable potions for all comers, and she decided to come and see it for herself just in case. What was her surprise when it turned out to be Yugji's store? Such fame even made our hero a little embarrassed. Looking at all the customers with number tickets, Hwang Sun-young sweetly asked if she had to get a number to meet our hero too. Yugji assured her that of course not. Happy Hunter members could come outside of the line and he would always be happy to see them, especially her. Taking one of the health restoration potions and looking at the label, she wondered if what it said was true. It was the first time she had ever seen the effects of a potion so beautifully and accurately written down as they were here. Yugji assured her that everything written on the label was true because he had asked the hunters who had used his potions and they had confirmed it. Hwang Sun-young was mesmerized by the color and consistency of the potion, and as she read over its effects, she was surprised at how much better its performance was compared to potions from other stores. They couldn't even be compared. She liked the potion so much that she wanted to buy more than the limit, arguing that she was a regular customer and should be allowed to, but Yugji was strict and principled about it and wouldn't let her. Instead, he prepared another surprise for her, which she was looking forward to. From under the counter he pulled out a scroll and offered it to her in return, a service for regular customers and a bonus in the form of a scroll. Unrolling the scroll, she noticed that it looked a little sloppy, but it was still beautifully written. The question that remained was, what was the effect of using this scroll? Yugji explained that these charms brought good luck. It was a wish creation scroll that allowed 2 small wishes to come true. He thought that he was a little worried about her since this was the first time he had given this scroll to someone, but in theory there shouldn't be any problems with such a simple scroll. Wang Sunyoung immediately decided to try it out and of course wished for a rare old book, but then nothing happened and she thought it was defective. She decided to keep it with her as a souvenir. After a while she went on a dungeon mission with a squad from her guild. The battle was in full swing, and the flying toothfish were flying from the blows in different directions. After one of the strikes, the monster fish flew farther away than usual. It flew straight at an unsuspecting gawker in a hovering trajectory. Wang Sunyoung froze in place and didn't move in the face of the threat. The fish was already long dead, but still, its weight was enough to crush the poor girl who thought she was going to die from the tooth of the horrible monster and did not hesitate to scream. The hunter who had launched the fish at her started apologizing. He didn't even notice what he had done at first. Then another guy from their squad asked the swordsman why he carried a sword if he was just going to beat his enemies to death. The swordsman apologized, saying, "Who would have thought that thing would fly so far away?" Wang Sunyoung had been lying on the ground unconscious the whole time. She finally came to her senses and stood up, saying she was fine although she was holding her bruised head. Suddenly the scroll in her pocket lit up, and a system notification appeared that she hadn't seen before. Her little wish was about to come true. If she experienced a small setback, the chance of getting special items would increase by 70% for 30 minutes. So the scroll only had one use left. Nothing portended trouble. However, the floor beneath her feet began to crack. The entire dungeon shook, and the group of hunters could barely stay on their feet, not realizing where the earthquake was coming from. In an instant they were all falling into the abyss that had formed right under their feet. Wang Sunyoung was still trying to grab her precious book, begging everyone and everything to save them, hoping that someone would hear them. However, the hunters were not simple men and managed to group themselves as they fell, landing on their feet. They weren't going to die from such a simple trap. Wang Sunyoung was the only one who landed unluckily and hit her back painfully. As usual, she couldn't understand why this kind of mishap was happening to her again and again. With a quick inspection, they found out that it didn't look like a deliberately dug trap, but rather that the floor between the 2 rooms had fallen through. Now to find out where they were trapped, the mage from their group used the spell Guide of Light. Immediately a golden butterfly appeared, glowing brightly and casting a warm light all around, revealing to the hunters a spacious storage room. In front of them were many treasures, weapons, and armor. To find such things in a dungeon, it was an unprecedented stroke of luck, and they wondered what it all meant. The big question was, how much was it all worth? The swordsman, of course, first found a nice night troop long sword, and the paladin found cool new armor. He assumed this place looked like a secret hideout. It seemed like everyone could find something of interest here. Wang Sunyoung, of course, noticed an ancient book with a strangely familiar pattern. Realizing what it was, she couldn't believe that it was actually a book that belonged to the Black Lion Knight troop of the Gemar Empire. For a bookworm like her, this was a true treasure. Her wish had finally come true, and now her eyes were shining with happiness. But the paladin interrupted her exuberant joy and told her to be quiet because this place might fall apart again. They should all grab what they needed and leave quickly. They made sure to quickly grab what they needed and leave. Heading up to the top again, as soon as they all got to the previous floor, a second earthquake started. It seemed that they were in danger as soon as they got any items. Their squad leader lost patience and ordered them all to stop fussing like fools. It would be suicide to go further into the dungeon, so they came to a mutual decision that they should go back now. That would be the best option. But Trouble did not want to let them go so easily, and when they were not far from the exit of the dungeon, behind them they heard the noise of a chase. It turned out that they were being chased by a huge swarm of fish-like flying creatures that they had already encountered at the beginning of their journey into the dungeon. However, there were too many of them now, and they were left with only one option: run. Run as fast as they had ever run in their lives to save their own skins. The hunters were scared and didn't look after Huang Sunyoung, who had never been a good sprinter and was the last to run. She wouldn't have been able to escape if it hadn't been for a fortunate incident that scared her to death. It was the first time she had ever seen such a creature. A huge scolopendra broke through the wall and caught the whole pack that was chasing the hunting party, making them the prey of a bigger predator. The scolopendra wasn't interested in humans at all, but they didn't know that. Scared by the creature's power, the hunters only had time to cover themselves from the dust and small stones that the scolopendra's movements raised. The old building could not withstand such interference, and everything around it shook like another earthquake. The ceiling and walls began to collapse, and large blocks of stone fell all around the confused hunters, who were huddled together. Wang Sanyang cried out in desperation, "God Ark, please save me. I don't want to die here." Her tearful pleas continued for a while longer, and she was even afraid to open her eyes since everywhere was already completely quiet. Too quiet. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw the confused faces of her friends. They didn't understand what had happened, how they were alive, and why it was so bright. It turned out that the scolopendra had created a hole in the wall through which the bright sunlight penetrated into the dungeon. The hunters had no idea what had happened. What were the ruins and desert around them? Where was the portal through which they had entered this dungeon? What the hell was going on in this world? But there was no one to answer their questions in this desolate place. And puzzled and angry, they tiredly wandered through the desert in search of the portal. Meanwhile, Yugji was having a pleasant time in his forest, watching the scolopendras that plumped up the ground for him. They seemed like small creatures to him, but in this world scale was always deceiving. Yugji was glad that thanks to these earthworms, the soil in this forest would become very fertile, and Bam of course confirmed with a joyous meow. While our hero was wondering what he should plant here in the first place, Bam was already rummaging through his backpack looking for the right item. Soon he brought his master a seed that he had gotten by killing an infected plant in the dungeon they were in with Sashin. When Yugji saw the seed, he immediately thought of the horrible toothy flower that would grow from it, and was not happy about the prospect. Just in case, he asked his kitty if he really wanted them to plant it, and Bam seemed to be 100% sure of what he wanted. He was even the first to start digging a hole for the planting, while Yugji was still questioning whether or not he should do it. After all, it looked a bit dangerous. But Bam was persistent, and quickly managed to dig the hole. He meowed carefree, hinting for our hero to hurry up and not to worry. Well, he wasn't going to be stubborn. After all, Bam had gotten the seed himself, and he could do whatever he wanted with it. Who was he to get in his way? When the job was done, he asked the cat if he was happy now, to which he heard an affirmative meow. While he was having a nice time in the forest planting plants, he had some very persistent visitors in the real world, and the bells immediately notified him with a chime. Yugji was surprised that someone had come to the store even though it was officially closed at this time. He lifted the happy Bam above him and asked him if they should return to the store now that everything was planted. He of course didn't mind. When they returned, Yugji started scrubbing the dirty kitty, who was covered in mud from working with the soil and was resisting as best he could. He even seemed to have forgotten why he had come back to the store, but the noise outside the window quickly reminded him of that. The group of hunters didn't understand why Huang Sonyang had dragged them here and why she was so angry. They were all tired after traveling, and were covered in mud as much as Bam. Yugji hurriedly opened the door. For them it was surprising how they all looked. Wang Sanyang was barely caught in time to keep her from attacking our hero with her fists. She was so eager to punch the bastard who had slipped her some sort of bad luck curse under the guise of a good luck charm. Yugji was surprised to notice that the system description of the scroll had expanded to say that if the user of the scroll experienced a minor setback, the chance of getting special items would increase by 70% for 30 minutes. That was an important clarification that changed everything, but it would be suicidal to explain all this to her now, so he decided to give her time to cool down and suggested that the whole group go inside and wash up first. After the shower, they all felt better, and the paladin even said that he could live now that he had gotten rid of all that dirt, while his girlfriend could not stop admiring the cute cat, who however was not so good inside and refused to accept any caress from her, defiantly turning away. Now it was time to ask them what had happened. The paladin was the first to start, briefly saying that they had entered the Viper dungeon, but suddenly earthworms appeared and completely destroyed the entire dungeon. Hearing their story, Yugji wondered if this incident was the price for using the scroll of wish creation. Only relief among them all was that they had found some secret hideout, but being there they had lost too much time and risked staying there forever. Yugji was surprised that they had found the secret hideout of the night troop, but he was even more surprised when Hwang Sunyoung told him what kind of knights they were. It was the secret hideout of the Black Lion Night Troop. Yugji really wanted to know more, and he clarified if she was talking about the Black Lion Night Troop of the Jamar Empire. Yes, she was talking about them. Moreover, she even had something that would make him lose his mind, and it was that item right in her backpack. It was this ancient book with an engraved gold lion on a black background. It turned out it was the Night Troop Commander's logbook, an invaluable treasure for knowledgeable bookworms. There was only one problem. Everything in this book was in an ancient language, so Hwang Sunyoung couldn't read most of it. Fortunately for our hero, thanks to the skills granted by the World Tree, he could read everything without any problems. It all started when the monsters that had appeared in the Estum Kingdom started to cross the border. She was surprised that he could read it all, and he confirmed that it was no problem for him. So she took out a dusty map from her backpack and said that if he could read it, he must know what it was. It turned out to be a damaged map of the continent of Jenna. This was an unprecedented treasure for our hero, and it seemed that he had been lucky enough to have gotten it from the very beginning of this story, without any scrolls, as he had too many convenient coincidences in his life. Hwang Sunyoung even doubted that the map was real, but Yugji assured her that he was sure of it. Then our hero had a brilliant idea of what he could do with the map. He immediately took his friend by the hand and with all his charm asked for one favor. Could you lend me this map just for a few days? In return, he offered her squad a whole case of first-rate potions. Would he really give them all of this for nothing? A bargain of unprecedented generosity. Looking at the potions, the hunters asked her to lend the map to our hero without a second thought. She just had to lend it for such a gift. Deciding to finally convince everyone, Yugji offered them, because they liked his potions so much, extra potions for a whole month. Of course they agreed, assuring him that he was a great guy. But once the deal was made, he wouldn't be able to cancel it. That wasn't a problem for our hero, he had plenty of potions. While Hwang Sunyoung's hunters were trying to drag her away from her precious book and map, as they thought it was just plain paper junk that they had gotten a week's supply of potions for, Yugji waved goodbye to them and wished them to be safe. He himself suddenly needed to do a lot of things because of this map and book, especially if he wanted to make a stock of potions for business and read the Night Troop Commander's logbook. Just as Bam was already starting to fall asleep, they should be heading back to the Forest of Dreams. Returning to the store and getting comfortable, our hero decided that he could prepare the potions after he went to his garden. But before doing so, he wanted to check the map that Hwang Sunyoung had lent him. Since it was a map of the Knights of the Empire, its detail and quality had to be at a high level. It even recorded the landscape, place names, and monsters that appeared in great detail. Examining the map, he came to the conclusion that the elder lich that appeared in Jiras came from the southern part of the Estum Palace, and the monster forest that he and Sakhian went to was near Mount Eter. If the map was complete and undamaged, he would be able to find out where all the dungeons where the monsters appeared from were located. Then he had another obvious idea on how he could find out more. All he had to do was ask the Turtura drones. They were bound to know something. Hoping so, he finally fell asleep, once again going to his dream world. As always, he found himself near the world tree in the forest, and stretched out sweetly, enjoying the warm weather and the bird song. Bam did not deny himself the pleasure of stretching, but this time something was strange. The surroundings were empty. No one had met them, and Yugji wondered where all the Turtara drones had gone. Everything came to a head when the bells rang out in full force, warning him that a strong monster had appeared in this area. At first Yugji didn't even believe it. The monster was here since it was calm and safe before, but the approaching evil energy and the sounds of battle quickly dispelled all his doubts. In the middle of the clearing stood a cyclops with a club in his hands, exuding its ominous aura. However, the Tertura drones were not idle, and had already surrounded the uninvited guest. Of course, our hero in the dream world was much bigger than the cyclops, but still he was surprised to see him here. Until now he had only heard of such a monster. The cyclops was a disaster-grade monster that first appeared in China. Not much was known about it other than its size and appearance, but it was said that dozens of hunters were sent out to catch it, and they didn't quite succeed. The cyclops had never been seen in Korea until today. He was actively swinging his club at the advancing Tertura drones. Knowing the threat level of the cyclops, our hero was surprised that BAM was not going to help in its elimination, completely entrusting everything to the small Tertura drones. Judging by the fact that no information windows appeared, the Tertura drones were doing fine on their own without any help. They used wooden shields and continued to advance on the Cyclops, just in case Yu decided to record what was happening on the battlefield so that he could better know the strengths and weaknesses of the Cyclops in the future. Meanwhile, the Tertura drone warrior led his army with shields forward. He successfully dodged the Cyclops mace and was already approaching the Cyclops eye, about to pierce it with his sharp horn. But it wasn't that simple, and dark energy began to gather around the eye. Yugji only had time to shout, "Watch out," when the Cyclops shot out a deadly beam of dark energy that barely caught and threw the Tertura drone warrior off. The beam was so powerful it swept away everything in its path: trees, rocks, and Tertura drones. It was an ultimate weapon, and it seemed that at this point the Terra drones had nothing to counter such power. The scratched warrior managed to retreat to the others, despite the damage, and it looked like he wasn't going to give up at all. He ordered something in his language to the others. Did they have a plan? At their general's orders, the rank-and-file Tertura drones brought a large stone of Ifa from their supplies and threw it directly to him. With quick movements he chopped it into smaller pieces that were shaped like shields. He did not forget himself, leaving a larger piece for his own use. The entire Tertura drone army was now protected by the new Ifa shields. They used them to build a wall of shields that shone under the sun's rays. However, it didn't change anything for the Cyclops, and he was going to wipe out those insolent bugs with his next salvo. The Cyclops took precise aim and fired. Yu himself couldn't believe that the Tertura drones were intentionally going to be directly hit by this deadly beam of light, but it seemed like they were really confident in their new shields. When the beam hit the shields, the protagonist immediately realized their plan and was pleasantly surprised by their cleverness. The Tertura drones used their shields as reflectors to repel the attack, and even more so, they used the enemy's weapon against himself. They aimed the Cyclops beam at his own arm and severed it along with the club. The hand, even when it hit the ground, was still clutching the club with a death grip, and Yugji did not miss the opportunity to colorfully describe it in his book. He summarized that when dealing with a Cyclops, the key strategy was to reflect its light rays with a shield made of Efa stones. Now that the Cyclops was disarmed, the Tertura drones rushed back into the attack, led by their commander. The Cyclops at this time forgot about everything in the world, screamed in pain, and tried to run away, but no one let him escape. Of course, a few precise blows on his legs and knees, and his escape was quickly over. The Cyclops collapsed with a crash, raising dust. Our hero rejoiced as if he had defeated the Cyclops himself, shouting, "They did it! They defeated a Cyclops!" A squad of Tertura drones took to the air and flew closer to greet and salute their master. As they approached, they all saluted him like real soldiers of his own army. Yu was happy that they did well and praised them, telling them that they were really tough guys. Bam was in complete agreement with him. For working so hard, he couldn't help but reward them, so he decided to give them a whole mountain of yellow goodies as well as dozens of Etha stones. Everyone was happy, and even Bam got a reward even though he didn't want to help. However, their fun was interrupted by a sudden notification from the system. When he opened it, he saw many notifications that 10 essence units had arrived in his account. Our hero didn't understand where it all came from and why it was a reward. In the end, he received as much as 30.25 units of essence. It turned out that his entries in the Endless Book of Laws were behind all of this. which then went straight to Wiki. Chakwon was sitting in her office, and while browsing the news she noticed that something new had appeared on Wiki. When she clicked on the new article, she was surprised to find that she had to spend 10 essence to read it, and then she could read the article on Cyclops' core strategy. This was the first time she had seen this kind of system and didn't know when it had appeared. However, to her, a measly 10 essence was worthless because she could earn that much very quickly just by walking around a few dungeons. Therefore, she boldly confirmed her request. She started reading and noticed that the Cyclops was swinging his club and had only one eye, from which he shot deadly rays of light. She was interested in reading and wondered what was next and what was the key to defeating the Cyclops. But when she reached a certain point, an annoying system window appeared in front of her again, asking for 10 more units of essence were required to see the final strategy for defeating the Cyclops. That's when she grabbed her head and started banging it against the keyboard, screaming that she didn't have any more essence. How she wanted to find that damned bastard who had published that post and let him see and feel it. How she would fry him to a crisp. Oh yes, he deserved it. Meanwhile, our hero suspected nothing and was having a great time relaxing in his forest of dreams. Suddenly some ominous feeling woke him up and made him feel in danger. The military was preparing to meet the monster and a dozen helicopters were patrolling the coastline, fortified just for such occasions. But as soon as the monster suddenly appeared out of the water, all the helicopters became useless scrap metal that exploded in an instant. The giant octopus was moving resolutely towards the shore, and it seemed that neither the military nor the hunters could stop it. It was moving fast, very fast, heading straight for the residential neighborhoods of the city. In front of its massive tentacles, the military scattered in panic, trying to save their lives. They didn't understand why the hunters hadn't gotten there yet. So far, the monster had no trouble overcoming all obstacles. Suddenly, one of the soldiers noticed another giant silhouette and immediately reported it to his terrified captain, who didn't understand what it was. It was a world eater, and compared to him, the octopus looked small and insignificant. Looking at him, the military were shocked. His abnormal size left no doubt about the level of threat he posed. The monster octopus realized that it was in trouble and instinctively began to move back into the sea, hoping to hide in the depths, but it failed. The whale opened its mouth wide and sucked up that poor octopus along with hundreds of tons of water. He was still trying to grasp something with his tentacles, but it was useless. The bottomless jaws did not leave him a chance. In a moment the mouth slammed shut and only one tentacle was still visible for a few seconds before it disappeared. After such a hearty meal, the world eater turned around and swam back to the open sea. Kim Honu was watching closely, of course from the safety of his office, and he was quite surprised by the behavior of this monster which just ate its fellow monster and returned to the sea. But after taking everything into consideration, he came to the conclusion that this giant whale was actually a demigod, who had long ago made a contract with the first awakened hunter. His assistant confirmed all his guesses by saying that the description of the creature matched almost exactly the appearance of the demigods described in the records. However, they still needed to take a closer look at this case, especially in the context that according to reports that had started coming from Japan, the wandering sea monsters that were usually near the Korean peninsula had moved towards southern Japan. Kim Honu was confused and didn't understand what had started to happen in the world in the past few weeks. Before it seemed that everything was clear and operated according to certain laws and reasons, but lately everything had gone wrong, and he couldn't understand what or who was causing it, and he was annoyed. But he had gotten better over the past few weeks and was quite happy. Wang Sunyoung brought a stack of old Estem books that she had found at the bookstore, as more and more of them had been available recently. That couldn't have pleased our pair of bookworms more, but our hero also had something to brag about. He gave her the expanded map he'd been completing for the past few days. Hwang Sun-young happily took it to look at and wondered if it was a complete map of the Eston Kingdom, but unfortunately it was just an extension that covered the areas near the Tals River. Our hero explained that he had made it using information he had learned from the Night Troop Commander's logbook, so this map might not be perfect, but after looking at it, she marveled at how detailed and high quality it was. In fact, the reason the map was so detailed was due to the Tertura drones, who had personally visited all the places, but she shouldn't have known that. At the same time, Hwang Sun-young marveled at the fact that even the roads had been drawn. However, the map was not yet complete. In order to finish it, Yue had to add the area south of the Tails River, and then he would have a complete map of the Estum Kingdom at his disposal. Seeing so much interest in this kingdom, Wang Sunyang wondered why he was working so hard to restore the map. It was already too much work for a normal hobby, and was more like some kind of obsession. The reason was simple: he wanted to help his acquaintance Aso Hien find someone, Hanok, who had disappeared without a trace a few years ago, but he was definitely alive and wandering somewhere on the continent of Jenna. Even though they found his armor and sword broken, there was still hope, and he was eager to solve the mystery behind his disappearance. Effectively using the abilities granted to our protagonist from the World Tree, he would definitely be able to find him and find out everything. Hak Sun-young immediately realized what was going on in her own way. It must be the woman he liked, and her sly smile made Yue deny everything. They had a fun chat and had a good time together, but the girl was tired and was going to go home to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow, early in the morning, she had to go on another quest, and our hero did not want to delay her. He advised her and her squad to go to his store tomorrow and stock up on potions, since she said it was a third-rank dungeon and they would need a lot of resistance potions. Yue was kind to her as always, and she thanked him for that. As she sat, she jokingly asked him to tell her if he found a girl, and as usual she clumsily hurried back to her house. Back in the store, he thought that thanks to her he had been able to gather more information very quickly, and moreover discovered another rune word. Remembering the runes, he looked at the Book of Infinite Spells. He decided to use the newly learned rune to create a scroll of change, a scroll that allowed him to find a trace of any living creature and confirm its location. He plucked the finished scroll from the book, thinking of Aso Hien, and her image appeared before his eyes, especially her smile. Yue himself didn't expect the scroll to work so quickly, and his eyes widened in surprise. His consciousness flew across the infinity of space and darkness, among which one star shone brightest. The closer he got to it, the brighter it glowed, until finally the image of Aso Hien walking somewhere appeared in it. The vision quickly passed, and Yue was quite pleased with the result. After all, he not only recognized her location but also the amount of power and energy she had at that moment. This scroll was very useful and could come in very handy in the future. Suddenly Bam mewed and jumped on the table, demanding attention from his master. Yue took him in his arms and apologized that the place was so noisy and crowded lately, and Bam purred contentedly. Then our main character suggested that the cat go to their dream garden and have dinner. Of course, he was delighted with the idea. When they fell asleep, they went into the garden, and the first thing that caught our hero's eye was how clean the water had become, even cleaner than it was before. Was it all thanks to the World Eater? The water was so clear that he even managed to catch a small fish. But the changes didn't stop there. The level of the sun apples, as well as the other fruits, had risen to the 3rd level, and now his potions were going to be even better. Yue went to greet the pterodon drones that seemed to have gotten bigger, and their numbers had also increased. Our hero had to apologize for the delay. He was so busy reading old books that he forgot about everything else, but the pterodon were not upset. They used the time to their advantage and were carrying the fruits of the World Tree. Yue immediately noticed that there were more of them than before. Everything was fine, and he praised his little helpers for a job well done. Suddenly, a pterodon knight flew up to our hero and started pulling his shirt up. Yue inquired what had happened. Was it something important? The pterodon pointed to the top of the World Tree, and it looked like he was inviting our hero to climb up there. It was a sight to behold. Yue had never been known for his physical fitness, and using his own body was not his strong suit, and the tree was very tall. Yue tried his best to get to the highest branch, with only a little bit left, and he finally made it. The view before him was astonishing, and he could see Mount Apito itself. This allowed him to make certain assumptions about the location of his garden. It meant that the continent of Jenna was really outside the garden. Suddenly, Bam became anxious and looked down as if spotting an enemy. Yue misunderstood him and thought he was hungry and said he was going to go down and feed him right away. He just had to be patient, but there was one little problem. As you know, it's not hard to climb high. It's much harder to get down. Lots of cats fall into this trap, and people sometimes too. Yua was not one of those weaklings and gathered his will into a fist and started to descend, but not even halfway down he felt something grab his leg and then it tied him up completely. This evil plant resembled the monster from which the seed he had recently planted near Bam's tree had fallen out, and now it looked like he was going to have to pay for it. Seeing the plant's predatory grin, he even froze for a moment, then screamed into the weight of the forest, begging the knight and Bam to save him. He shouted, "Save me," time after time, but there was no help. The plant monster also let out a frightening roar and seemed about to start devouring him with its hungry mouth. But it only seemed so, and there was no need to save anyone, because the monster was friendly and gently put our hero on the ground without causing him any harm. It seemed like everything that had happened before was just a misunderstanding and a play of Yua's imagination. This plant was quite cute, and Bam didn't mind its company at all, but Yua still had some misgivings. So he awkwardly thanked the plant for helping him down. In the end, Yua came to the conclusion that on second thought, this cute plant just liked to hug people and didn't want to hurt them. But the question remained whether it was worth publishing it on the Mirror Wiki or not. Now that everything was clear, and Yua was used to his new friend and had gotten his thoughts together, he began to look around. He came to the conclusion that they must cross this plain to reach Mount Apido. The name of this mountain sounded familiar to our hero. He remembered reading about it in an old journal he had received from Huang Sonyang. It said that the survivors who had managed to escape from the undead kingdom of Estum had gone to this mountain. Also, according to the information he received from the Tertera drone, the dungeon where he and Aso Hayan found Hanzyuk's trail was located south of Estum Kingdom and near the Taos River. Now if you put all these facts together and look at the map, which says that the Taos River flows right behind Mount Apido, eventually our hero came to the conclusion that his garden or forest of dreams where he was right now, was south of Mount Apido and the Taos River must flow behind this very mountain. He began to draw a map of the proposed route, hoping that perhaps if he went there he could find more traces of Hanzyuk. However, once he set off, soon enough he hit an impenetrable barrier that prevented him from moving on. Even his garden wasn't endless and had its boundaries, and this was one of them. Further, our hero's way was closed. Fortunately, he was accompanied by a pterodon drone knight, to whom all these restrictions did not apply, as this was his home world. Yua gladly took this opportunity to leave everything related to Mount Apido to the pterodon. The pterodon army was immediately ready to carry out the order without delay, and while they were marching to the mountain for information, Yua decided to go eat something tasty with Bam. As soon as he turned to call Bam to come with him, he was startled by what he saw. The cat was gone. He had managed to escape so quietly and stealthily that Yua hadn't even noticed. Our hero spent some time in futile attempts to find his naughty cat and scared away the animals in his garden, which were already few, but he quickly came to the conclusion that all these attempts were futile, and there was no point in continuing. Even ordinary cats were too willful and free-spirited to listen to their masters, let alone the magical Snowy Actus, who was a nature spirit. However, in Yua's opinion, this was strange. This was the first time Bam had ever run away from him. He must be wandering around somewhere. Good thing he at least ate before running away. Suddenly, a light touch on his shoulder startled him, and he almost started running in panic. He remembered those horrible plants too well. Yua even cried out in fright, not realizing what was happening. However, it was only his new friend who was just pointing in the direction Bam was running, and his toothy smile in no way reflected unfriendly intentions. Even the fact that Yua knew where Bam had run off to didn't make things any easier, and he doubted that he would be able to catch up with him. He probably shouldn't have interfered with whatever he was up to. Yua returned home, where he also continued to think sadly. He couldn't believe that his loyal Bam had abandoned him and gone out on his own without him. After all, they had so many plans and tasks to do together. Yua felt lonely. He had gotten so used to Bam lately, and he missed feeding his favorite cat, stroking his soft belly and taking walks together. Now all that was gone, and it seemed the strength to do anything had left our hero. He did not have to be sad alone for long, as guests appeared on the doorstep of his store. Kim Hungu, the head of the Goru group, and sword witch Asohayan, saw our hero in such a state for the first time. Yua immediately jumped up and greeted the guests. The first thing he asked the sword witch was, "Who's the gentleman next to you?" But before she could introduce him, he came up to Yua and introduced himself as Kim Hunggu, the head of the Hunter Management Association. He was really glad to have the opportunity to get to know Yua properly. Especially for this, he had asked Miss Han to arrange for them to meet again. And it was, of course, all about the potions Yua was making. Kim Hunggu thought they were quite extraordinary and useful, noting that nothing like them could be found anywhere else. Our hero was very flattered by this praise and embarrassedly thanked him for it. Then he asked the guests to wait a little while he brought tea. When the table was set and the aroma of tea filled the store, Ko Hien said that she was quite surprised when Yua first contacted her. As he explained, he had something important to tell her. The sword witch was at a loss as to what he had to say to her. As it turned out, during a recent study of an ancient book, our hero had found something that would be of great use to her. It was a scroll, very similar to the ones he had made with his endless book of spells. When Se-Hien opened it and read the title, Scroll of Change Trace, the head of the association was surprised and had no room to say anything. For Yua, however, it was something ordinary, and he happily said that it should help her find Mr. Su. When Kim Hunggu came to his senses, he immediately flooded our hero with questions. Did he make the scroll himself? How did he manage to make it just by translating an ancient book? But he was interrupted by Ko Hien, who assured him that they would keep it a secret. Even if he didn't tell them, they would understand. Yugji only laughed awkwardly in response. Even if he really wanted to, he wouldn't be able to explain to them how he did everything. His skills were too rare and would sound too unbelievable. Suddenly, the lingering silence was broken by Kim Hunggu, who, while adjusting his glasses like a typical tough detective, asked, "Mr. Jia, did you make a contract with a part divine?" This question caught our hero unarmed, and he was at a loss for words, trying to understand how Kim knew about demigods, nature spirits, and sea spirits, Bam and World Eater. Yua tried to pretend he didn't know what he was talking about and hesitantly interjected, "Part divine?" But Kim Hunggu had become the head of the Hunter Association for a reason, and finding something interesting, he wasn't going to back down, so he clarified that part divines were also known as demigods. Their gazes met. Kim Hunggu suddenly retreated with a smile and assured Yua that he didn't have to tell him what abilities he had, just like how he used them was completely up to him. But he wanted Jia to know that he had become a very important person in the South Korean hunting community. After all, thanks to his first-class potions, the survival rate of hunters in raids had increased by 20% in general, and this fact already showed that hunter management was in his debt. As it turned out, he came here to give him his card. He should use it if he needed anything. Hunter management would support him and do their best to help. Yua wasn't sure he deserved all of this, so he asked Kim Hunggu if he could really count on his help. Kim confidently stated that yes, he could, because everyone thought he was the future of all hunters. His epic inspirational speech was interrupted by a disgruntled Ko Hien, who was not happy with the fact that they were talking about work. Kim Hunggu assured her that he wanted to meet Jiha in person. However, that was the case for him, and he assured her, "I'm talking very personally right now." Ko Hien immediately apologized to our hero for this, explaining that manager Kim was a well-known workaholic, so he wasn't that good at friendly conversations. Yua brightened his smile and thanked Kim for everything, saying that he appreciated all his generous offers, and would definitely treat him to a delicious lunch next time. Kim wasn't used to such offers, but he was pleasantly surprised and awkwardly thanked our hero. For some, robots are really everything in life. Sakrian sighed and said, noting that he was perfect at everything robotic. Yua even found him cute in his own way. Now that they were rid of the extra pair of ears, they could finally talk more freely, and our hero suggested she go back inside and talk some more. There he took out his endless book and started drawing without saying anything to Kook, who was at a loss to guess what he was drawing. But he didn't want to waste time with explanations and asked her to wait a while and she would see for herself soon. He put two drawings in front of her. One was a mountain with a river, and the other was the ruins of the Estum kingdom. Yu admitted that his drawings were not perfect, but still advised her to use the scroll he had given her earlier. If she saw a similar landscape in one of the dungeon raids, while using the scroll she would have to focus her thoughts on Hungo, and if he was nearby the scroll would definitely show her where he was. He didn't tell her that, but he still hoped that she would be able to track him down using the scroll just like he had. He even made a lame excuse that he would like to test the scroll himself, but he had made the scroll using the last remaining ink. Code immediately began to thank him and started shaking his hand with tears of gratitude. There was no limit to her gratitude. To calm her down a bit, Yu assured her that he believed Hanak was alive somewhere, and he himself would do his best to help her find him. Code, looking at him, couldn't say anything else but that he was a kind person. It seemed that everything was already clear and a spark of love was about to run between them, but our hero, intentionally or not, spoiled everything with one phrase. "It's nothing. We're friends, and friends are meant to help each other." Ko abruptly shortened her distance and told him almost tightly that if he needed help with anything he should let her know right away. The poor guy didn't know where to go or why she was so close. Suddenly the awkward moment resolved itself when Ko noticed Bam's absence. She only now realized that she hadn't seen him since the beginning of their visit here. As for that, Yua could only say one thing. He had run away. At the same time, Bam was quickly running through the thick of the night forest, a cute white kitty that seemed to have a specific goal. In an instant, the little cat disappeared into the darkness.